Thank you, Scott. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday, December 1st, 2020 meeting of the Edina City Council. It is 7:01 p.m. And before we call the meeting to order, there's, I think as many of you know, some things that we need to be doing. This meeting is being held electronically, and because it's being held electronically, we need to comply with the governor's Stay Safe Minnesota order. And we're also doing this to ensure the safety of all the residents and staff due to the second wave of COVID-19. So all members of the City Council, the staff, the presenters are participating from their homes or offices, all in the virtual world. So before we begin, there's a few things we'd like to cover for those listening in and hoping to participate in portions of the meeting. I think if you've looked at the agenda, you know that we've got 4 public hearing matters in the main council agenda and 1 in the HRA. So I think that you all know that while operating virtually for public health and safety purposes, the city has been collecting and continuing to commit itself to collecting and receiving and hearing your input on different matters. We get this public input through our council correspondence web form, a voicemail, and our engagement website, bettertogetheredina.org. It's important that all of you know that are listening in that all comments that have been submitted have been received and read prior to the start of this meeting. You do not need to submit the same feedback in any other way. All forms of communication are going to be considered equally, regardless of the way in which it was submitted. And with respect to the public hearing matters that are being held tonight, those will not be resolved this evening. They'll be set over until our next meeting. So tonight, there will be 2 times to call in to provide comment via phone. The first is during community comment portion of the agenda. And during community comment, you'll be allowed to speak about anything that's not on tonight's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. Again, if it's something on the agenda tonight, do not try to address that in community comment, or if it's scheduled for a future public hearing, that would also be inappropriate. Anything else, we'll be happy to hear your commentary. And then the second opportunity to call in is during the several public hearings that we have. So just as a heads up, before we get to community comment or public hearings, if you want to call in, the number is 800-374-0221, 800-374-0221. The conference ID number is 154-8149, 154-8149. And then you will be talking to someone who will put you in the queue to speak. You'll have 3 minutes. Our city manager, Scott Neal, will be the timekeeper, and he'll let you know if you go over the 3-minute mark. Remember, you don't have to call in tonight if you've already provided feedback unless you feel compelled to do so. And to the extent we can avoid having information being presented that's redundant, that's beneficial to all of us as well. So if you have new comments or information to bring forward, please feel comfortable in doing so. So as I mentioned earlier, to make sure residents have an opportunity to participate fully, because we're working in this virtual platform, we're not going to act on the public hearing matters tonight. The public hearing matters will remain open until noon on Wednesday, December 9th, and you'll hear that in the body of the motions that are made. You can leave a voicemail with your feedback at 952-826-0377. That's 952-826-0377. Or you can submit a comment online at bettertogetheredina.org. And again, that's going to be open until Wednesday noon, December 9th. As I mentioned earlier, there's a Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting immediately after tonight's City Council meeting. There's a public hearing at the HRE meeting, and the phone number and the conference ID number to participate and share a comment are the same as they are for the City Council meeting that we've just discussed. And then the public can also watch the HRE meeting on our cable channel, on our website, or on our Facebook page. So thanks in advance for your patience as we continue to work on this under this virtual platform during COVID-19. We're, as you know, we're using different types of software, almost 20 people participating from different places. We hope there won't be any issues that we need to address that are technologically oriented, but if we do have to do that, we'll do the best we can to cure those issues as soon as possible. So let's call the meeting to order. And we've got our clerk, Sharon Allison, with us this evening. And Clerk Allison, would you call the roll, please, for the City Council?
Absolutely. Councilmember Anderson?
Here.
Councilmember Brindle,
Here.
Councilmember Fisher, Councilmember Fisher, you're muted. Councilmember Fisher,
Member Fisher, can you hear us? Member Fisher? Uh-oh. No, we're muted.
well, let's go
Councilmember
to
Fisher?
I'm here.
Councilmember Staunton,
I'm here.
Mayor Hovland.
Here.
We'll check back in with Councilmember Fisher in a bit.
Okay, well, he's got a problem. We need to get him to fix that here. So maybe somebody can send him a text or in the chat. If there is a chat, maybe we could send him a chat. All right, now is, I think, Member Fisher will see what's going on when I stand up to do the Pledge of Allegiance. So you'll realize something is askew. So I'll do the Pledge of Allegiance next. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We've got a form of meeting agenda in front of us this evening. Does anyone wish to modify the meeting agenda? Member Fisher, you are present.
I am present. It's coming in and out, so I'm going to try to turn off some of my other.
Okay.
I normally have everything on my other device, so I'll try to turn something off here.
We've got a form of.
I may have to eliminate my video.
We have a form of meeting agenda in front of us this evening. Is there anyone who wishes to modify the meeting agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the meeting agenda as shown.
So moved.
Second. Member Staunton moves, Member Anderson seconds.
Yeah.
The approval of the meeting agenda. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to approval of the meeting agenda.
Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle,
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher,
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. The form of meeting agenda that was published is approved. Next, we are going to move on to community comment. And we discussed that a little bit before we opened up the meeting. And just a reminder, folks, if you want to speak to the council about something that's not on the agenda tonight or scheduled for a future public hearing, feel free to be calling in. Again, that number is 800-374-0221. The conference ID is 154-8149, 154-8149. An operator will ask for your name and street address and put you in the queue to speak, and then Director Benarott will bring you in to speak to the council. Again, you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and Manager Neal will be our timer and let you know if you run into trouble from a time standpoint and warn you if you're over the 3-minute mark. So, Director Benarott, do we have anybody in the queue with respect to community comment?
Good evening, Mayor Hovland, members of the council. Our first speaker tonight under community comment is Mr. Andy Brown. Operator, will you please unmute Mr. Brown's line? And Mr. Brown, please begin by stating your full name and address for the record.
Hello.
Mr. Brown, you're here. You're live. Go ahead.
Okay. Andy Brown, 5512 Park Place in Edina. Got a quick question regarding the increase in permitting fees. It seems arbitrarily low at 1 and 1.5%. When all other fees in the city are going up between 5 and 8%, doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. I'd actually like to see, as a citizen, the public request to see the financial analysis behind how the permit fees are established in relationship to the costs. I understand you have to charge what the costs are. And I look at 2 houses that have been torn down and I look at the permit fee site, and the dollars on there are, I apologize, they're pathetic. So you're not covering your costs, and I'd like to get a better understanding of that.
All right.
It affects our ability to do things like warming houses and street reconstruction and everything down the line. So
All right.
I think I've had a couple conversations with you, Mr. Mayor. So
all right.
thanks.
Mr. Brown, don't forget this is a public hearing matter, so we should have had you hold up on that until the public hearing matter that comes up, the last one we have this evening on feed. So you may want to call back in. Anyone else in community comment, in the community comment queue?
I do not have anyone in the queue as of this moment, though I do have someone else on the line. As a reminder to those who are on the line, if you'd like to speak, please press *1 on your telephone keypad. That's the asterisk and then number 1. That will put you in the queue to speak. If you decide you would prefer not to speak, you would press the # key. With that, council, I still don't see anyone joining the queue. I would recommend, because there is a slight delay in the broadcast, that we wait a minute or so before moving on. I'm watching my clock. It's 7:12 on my screen. So I will interrupt either when we have another speaker or at 7:13, whichever is first.
Thank you.
Members, it's now 7:13 and I do not have any other callers in the queue, so I think it's safe for you to move on.
Thank you, Director Benarott. We'll next move on to the city manager's response that occurred 2 weeks
Thank you, Your
ago.
Honor.
Manager
2
Neal.
weeks ago, we had a brief comment on the status of Fire Station 3. I wanted you to know that our staff had an update this morning with the siting consultants that we have selected. And so they're continuing to work on the evaluation of 3 different sites in the kind of the northeast quadrant of the city. So we are continuing to move that forward. We are also working on Fire Station 2, the Fire Station 2 proposal, not only from a capital funding standpoint, but also from a siting standpoint as well, and looking for the optimal locations in the Southdale district. So that continues. There was another comment last week, though, about at the previous meeting about Better Together Edina and why we require people to register for Better Together Edina. And the fact is, you don't have to register at Better Together Edina, which is becoming more important to us as a community engagement tool. You don't have to register if all you want to do is view the information. However, if you want to participate, if you want to post comments, if you want to sign up for regular email updates, we do require you to register because we need to have some way to have dialogue with you. And that's not dissimilar from social media sites like Facebook and others. We don't require people to register for Novus or for the MuniCode sites. Public can use those. They can't post any comments. They don't get automatic updates, but there's no registration required for those. We do have a relatively brief privacy policy. It's on our website. It's not difficult to read, and it does explain what happens to your information. There was a question about why do we require people to provide demographic information. We do not require people to provide demographic information as part of Better Together. All the questions are optional. You can register and participate without answering those questions. Answering those questions, however, helps us to discern who's using the site, how are they using it, and it helps us make the site more engaging for folks with different perspectives and different experiences. So we appreciate people sharing their demographic information with us, but you can use the site and register for it without sharing your demographics with us. Finally, there was a question about what we shouldn't require more information from folks to use our online tools as we would at a meeting. To register for Better Together, we require an email address, a username, and a neighborhood, and that's it. if you want to speak at a public meeting, we require a name and an address, a street address. So they're comparable, I think. They're not, certainly it isn't more intrusive to join better together. And we just wanted to answer those questions, and we're going to take that information that we've put together in preparing for this to put into an FAQ and have that available at the site so people can see this information who have questions about it.
Thank you, Manager Neal. Did that prompt any inquiry or comment from any council member? Okay, good follow-up on those questions from a couple of weeks ago. We'll move on now to the consent agenda. We've got several items on the consent agenda. Is there any council member that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as shown in the main agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Member Fisher, second by Member Brindle. With regard to adoption of the consent agenda items, any further discussion? Roll call, please, on the motion to adopt the consent agenda.
Councilmember Brindle,
Aye.
Councilmember Anderson,
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher,
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. The items on the consent agenda are approved in a single motion. Just one quick notation on the resolution 2020-126, accepting donations on behalf of the city of Edina. We had some very nice donations to the Park and Rec Department. Great Neighborhood Homes, $700 on donation of trees. Perot Construction, $350 for a donation of trees. And then Richard Mills, a wonderful bench donation in the amount of $3,200. So thank you, Mr. Mills, and those donors' names will be posted on the website. Let's move on now to the next portion of the agenda, which is special recognitions and presentations. We have one item in the that portion of the agenda this evening, and that is the 2020 Tom Oy Award presentation. And Kat Berenger, our chair of our Human Rights and Relations Commission, is with us this evening to announce the award recipients. And I'm sure they're here with us as well. So, Chair Berenger, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. So the Human Rights and Relations Commission is pleased to honor Rachel Adegbenro, Rebecca Sorensen, and the Edina High School Black Student Union with this year's Tom Oy Award for their project Seeds of Change. Each year, the HRRC asks for nominations from members of our community to receive the Tom Oy Award, and this year there were several nominations, all of them worthy of being recognized. We are so grateful to be a part of a community where so many of us are investing in the advancement of human rights and equity on so many fronts. The Tom Oy Award is among the highest honors given to an Edina resident. To even be considered, your work must demonstrate efforts to foster respect and dignity for others, model courage or compassion in the advancement of human rights, and demonstrate leadership by example for improving human relations or advancing human rights. Started in 2006, Edina's Human Rights Award was established in recognition of the late Tom Oy, a second-generation Japanese American who served as a Nisei soldier in World War II and who was a founding member of the city's Human Rights and Relations Commission. In 2003, Oy received the Prize for Humanity by the Immortal Chaplains Foundation, a distinguished honor. So the Seeds of Change was a public art installation set up in the 50th and France business area after the police killing of George Floyd. The installation and dedication brought together numerous artists and supporters of all ages to start a conversation about the Black Lives Matter movement and race equity in Edina. The project brought together voices of all ages and was well received by so many members of the community. The art was placed in flower pots along 50th and weatherproofed so it could remain there throughout the summer. And the dedication brought together residents to recognize the need for a conversation about racial justice. There were so many who talked about feeling proud of our city whenever they passed by the display throughout the summer. Many found the art compelling and a place for healing after the civil unrest in our greater community. There is so much more to be done, but we are thankful to Rachel, Rebecca, and the EHS Black Student Union to be willing to gather so many different people to create a project that marks a beginning. Congratulations on winning the 2020 Savoy Award.
Chair Berenger, you're making it tough on all of us. Thank you. I'm going to go first to Rachel Adeg-Benro. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. It's been a while.
Indeed. And so give us your thoughts about being this award recipient, I suppose, both receiving it for yourself and for the members of the Black Student Union. And then we'll go to Rebecca Sorensen for a few comments as well.
Yeah. I'm super grateful. I'm very thankful for, everyone who played a big part in what they had to do, just to get the whole project going and get it up and moving. I had some of my two friends, Anna Devine and Phoebe Taiwa, help me with it. And, without their help, and of course, Rebecca, we wouldn't have gotten it done. So I'm just very grateful for everything that everyone's done and all the work that people put in. And, seeing the Edina community come out and support made me very happy. And I'm very grateful for this award. And I'm very happy that I was nominated for it.
Well, well deserved. So congratulations from all of us. I wish we were all together in person so we could celebrate this more appropriately. But this is a wonderful award, a wonderful choice by the Human Rights and Relations Commission. Rebecca Sorensen, nice to have you with us tonight as well.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you. What an honor to receive this award with Rachel. I have been in awe of the Black Student Union after the horrible killing of George Floyd, the countless efforts they made to bring supplies to Minneapolis, the march they led from the high school to City Hall. And then when I called Rachel and talked about the idea of public art around the Black Lives Matter movement, she said, absolutely yes. And it was amazing to see Rachel and the Black Student Union and start and become the heart and soul of this public art, to motivate and compel so many artists from Minneapolis and Edina to put signs in these pots that the 50th and France Business Association made available for us, that were planted by volunteers from the Morningside Women's Club, and that became welcome signs to Edina from Minneapolis for so many. We're honored, Kat, that you chose us. We're honored that Feroza Mehta nominated us. This was a true community effort that involved so many with the leadership of the Black Student Union. I'm as emotional as everyone else about this. It was truly a life-changing experience and a bright spot in a very dark year with just so many challenges with social distancing and this terrible virus. But this was a beautiful effort, and we really did see conversations start from this and spread into neighborhoods all over Edina. And I think it really changed the way people perceive Edina, that we're ready to have these hard conversations here in our community, that there's a real need and desire to have them. And that was evident too by you, Mayor Hovland, taking a stand of leadership for this, and all of the support letters you received from community members. Again, we are so grateful to 50th and France businesses for supporting this effort, obviously for the Black Student Union leadership, and just all of the artists in our community that came out of the woodwork. And I also want to give a special shout out to Jennifer Benneret from your team, who was just phenomenal, helping to guide us all along the way as we sort of made this come to life. So thank you again. What an honor.
Yeah, thanks to both of you for being here this evening. Well deserved. It was a wonderful program on a beautiful afternoon, and we'd be remiss if we didn't mention our council member-elect James Pierce's daughter Olivia singing a song that she composed and performed herself called X-Ray, which was really quite remarkable. So thanks to all of you. Chair Berenger, thank you so much for making the decision to all your colleagues on the HRRC. It was a a well thought through and well deserved recognition of these folks that were involved with the Seeds of Change artwork at 50th and France. Rachel, good luck to you.
Thank you.
See you soon somewhere. And Rebecca, always great to see you. Any other council members have quick comments?
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks for being with us this evening.
Thank you. It was remarkable.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
And now we will move on to public hearings. We've got, as I mentioned earlier, 4 public hearing matters. The first one involves a request for a preliminary development plan and consideration of an EAW and an overall development plan, a potential rezoning from PCD3 to PUD. And this is for what we call the U.S. Bank site, which is 7001 and 7025 France Avenue. And our Community Development Director, Kerry Teague, will open this matter, and then he'll be followed by the applicants that are going to have a presentation for us. It'll take about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for public testimony. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we'll take public testimony until December 9th at noon, and then we'll close that public hearing. So, Director Teague, you want to kick us off on this matter?
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. This property is located in really in the heart of the greater Southdale district. It is the intersection of 70th and France on the east side of France. Existing on the site today is about a little over 60,000 square foot office building, home to the U.S. Bank, surface parking, and there's also a bank drive-through. The site is zoned planned commercial district, so it has the same zoning as Bay Korea and Southdale, located just to the north. The site is located in the Height Overlay District 8, which allows up to 8 stories and 96 feet. The site is guided in our comprehensive plan, the 2040 plan, as Community Activity Center. So in the comp plan and in the greater Southdale district plan, this area was seen as the area where we anticipate the most dense development to occur, in between France and York. The allowed density here for residential is up to 150 units an acre. This project here proposes is around 67 units an acre, but it is a mixed-use development, so there's a retail and office component as well. This project requires a rezoning, so this is a graphic that we've shared many times. The city does have complete discretion, really, in approving or denying this, being that it does require a zoning ordinance amendment. So the specifics at full build out, the first phase of the project would be a new U.S. Bank building, be about 6,500 square feet. That would be phase 1. The development of the new bank really then opens up the site for development. The existing building would remain open should the project be approved, and the new bank building would be built to the south. Once that bank would be finished, then that existing building would be removed with the rest of the development to occur in later phases. So that includes a 24-story, 280-foot tall apartment building. There'd be retail on the main level, a 10-story, 190,000 square foot office and retail building, and a 9-story, 110 unit apartment building. The applicant did go through sketch plan with Planning Commission and City Council, as you recall. This is a look at the sketch. But based on the feedback from Council and Planning Commission, they've made a number of changes. To highlight a few, the residential building to the south kind of was in the way of the north-south street. They've shifted that over so that north-south street through the site can be a straight shot through. They've expanded green space. They've paid particular attention to the building typologies and the design experience guidelines. Expanded public space south of the residential tower, to name a few things. So here's a look at the proposed project. So you can see the 24-story building, retail on the main level. The height of the building steps in per the design experience guidelines. Same goes for the retail and office building on the corner. This is the 9-story apartment to the south, and then the U.S. Bank site up on France. A significant piece of this proposal, and it addresses the design experience guidelines. We're looking to divide large parcels like this up into smaller blocks and provide future connections to adjacent properties. And this project has done a great job of that. As you can see in green, this would be the proposed north-south connection through the site. Highlighted in blue here, they would dedicate an easement for future connection to the property to the south. The property to the south is a little retail mall, and actually the back of the building would be located right behind the blue here. But it does open that potential up in the future. There would also be an east-west connection, and then the additional park space that I mentioned would be located just south of the tower. This encompasses about 26% of the project, would be all dedicated for public space. So there would be a public access easement through north-south and east-west. However, the applicant would be responsible for any maintenance, construction of that roadway, and they would also maintain it. Of course, there would be public easements over the sidewalks in front along France as well. One issue that came up during the sketch plan, the council probably recalls, is the U.S. Bank building itself. They're proposing a 40-foot setback at sketch plan, and that's essentially the same proposal here. However, the traffic study came back and suggests that a right turn lane into the site, this is France Avenue that you're seeing on the screen, a right turn lane is needed, so the actual setback would be 30 feet from the curb. But when viewing down France, the north building would have the 50-foot setback. It would give the appearance of a 40-foot setback. You can kind of see here the green space would stick out to the north of that entrance. But that setback is important to U.S. Bank, and so that one of the conditions that the Planning Commission is recommending is that 50-foot setback be maintained. The applicant is asking the council for forgiveness on that. They would like to maintain that 40, or would then become a 30-foot setback with that right turn lane. I'll just quickly go through a couple of images. The applicant will provide a little more detail. What you're looking at here is that park at the base of the tower. This is the east-west street, the apartment building. I'll look at the north-south street. While we have this slide up, another condition that the Planning Commission added was they would like to see the width of the drive aisles reduced down to 10 feet each way. The original proposal was 24 feet. The applicant has, in fact, they'll show a slide later that does accommodate a 20-foot drive aisle. And they were also able to increase some of the sidewalk width as well. A couple more views of the site. There was a shadow study done. There would be shadows cast on 70th, particularly during the winter months. And just quickly, I mentioned the site plan with the bank. This is, you can see the new turn lane, 40-foot setback to the existing curb, but this does become 30 with that new drive lane. Another change in the site plan that the applicant will show the council as part of their presentation. There was concern at the Planning Commission about the number of parking spaces and wanting to shift the building again to the east. The applicant is willing to eliminate some parking stalls. In fact, it would be this row here, and they would line up this drive entrance with that north-south street to the north. But again, the applicant will have a slide that better shows that. They're also increasing some of the green space that's proposed here. So they've done a nice job trying to address issues that were raised by the Planning Commission. This request requires a rezoning from PCD3 to planned unit development. there's a subdivision request here. They're going to divide the property into those 4 parcels. And consideration of an environmental assessment worksheet. The city hired Kimley Horn. Ashley Payne is with us this evening, and she will present the detail of the EAW, what it is, why it's required, as part of the staff presentation. So quickly reviewing the site plan, I mentioned there's a right-in, right-out on France, 2 access points off 70th. The red X's here indicate vehicle access into the apartments and on the east side of this apartment. The delivery loading area would be located right here. Truck movement would come in off of 70th. They wouldn't be allowed to come in off of France. They would come through the roundabout this way and then into the enclosed delivery and loading area. They would then back out and then move out on France. In terms of the number of parking stalls, based on the density and the square footage, there would be just under 1,400 parking stalls required per our code. They're proposing 1,170 stalls. We did have a parking study done by SPAC Consulting. They also did the traffic study, which also incorporated into the EAW. Mike SPAC is with us this evening. He will also make a presentation as part of this overall staff presentation following Ms. Payne. The conclusion of the traffic study is that the existing roadways can support the project, subject to some conditions, and I mentioned that right turn lane, but Mike will go into that in more detail. In terms of landscaping, would all be code compliant, building materials, code compliant. There may be some issues with the new 75% open glass at the ground level, in particular with the bank. That was one condition that's included in the recommendation for approval. Again, the applicant is requesting that 75% be basically removed from the conditions. We believe the other buildings meet or are very near the 75% requirement. We did have Mick Johnson, our consultant in the Greater Southdale District Plan, provide a review that's included in the council packet. He didn't seem to have issues with the other buildings in regards to the 75% other than the bank building. But I might note that in Mick's review, he's very complimentary of this project. In fact, we've really never had a review from him that's positive as far as this project meeting the design experience guidelines. Also want to point out the signage that's proposed right here on the corner of the building. By our city code, that would not be allowed as it's located on where there would be parking behind it. So they're asking for some flexibility through the PUD to allow this sign. Staff and the Planning Commission was okay with that request as well. So in terms of flexibility from our base zoning, they're asking for setback relief, as I mentioned, from the US Bank building. Some of the interior setbacks are based on the height of the building, so they would request some flexibility there. Also building height, we have a 9, 10, and 24-story building. Again, the base zoning is 8 stories. The FAR is a little over 2, so they're requesting flexibility there as well, and with the parking. So primary issues for consideration of the council is the proposed PUD zoning of the site reasonable, and then the second is the consideration of the EAW. So I'll go through the PUD justification, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Payne. So first with the PUD justification, so both staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval here. The vote at the Planning Commission was 5-2. We believe that this site, given its location in the Community Activity Center, again, an area of town where it was determined through the Greater Southdale Area Plan and the Comprehensive Plan that this was the area that we recognized for greater density. As long as, so part of the caveat is as long as they're following the design experience guidelines, flexibility on height, for example, if possible. And the applicant has done a very good job of addressing the design experience guidelines. Some of those highlights, as I mentioned, dividing the property up, providing those vehicle and pedestrian connections, following the street typologies. There's no visible surface parking here, and the provision of 26% of the site interior dedicated to the public. It would be beyond that if you factored in the 50-foot setback, or the 30 to 50-foot setbacks on 70 at France. We also believe that the PUD criteria is met. The applicant is proposing to meet the city's affordable housing policy. They would either provide 38 units would be the requirement here within either of the two apartments, or they would do the buy-in. That would be determined at final rezoning approval. So not to be determined this evening, or when the council takes action, rather that would be settled at final, but they have committed to meeting the city's policy. So with that, I will turn it over to Ashley Payne of Kimley Horn, who again, on behalf of the city, prepared the EAW.
Right. Thanks, Carrie. My name is Ashley Payne, and I'm an environmental scientist at Kimley Horn, who specializes in environmental documentation and assessments for various types and sizes of projects in Minnesota. Myself and my team at Kimley Horn have extensive experience completing environmental reviews, so EAWs, AUARs, and EISs in the state of Minnesota, and are actually on the state of Minnesota's environmental review master contract list. As noted, Kimley Horn prepared the EAW on behalf of the city, and we just thought it would be helpful to kind of go through, since the city hasn't gone through this process recently. So what is an environmental assessment worksheet, or an EAW? An EAW is a brief document designed to lay out the basic facts of a project. The EAW form consists of 20 questions and is published by the Environmental Quality Board. So it's a standard form that everyone fills out when they go through the EAW process. It's actually a form that can be found on the EQB's website. So the purpose of an EAW is to inform the public about the project. It provides information on the future permitting and approvals, and it helps identify potential impacts and mitigation strategies. An EAW is not a document that approves or denies a project. It's just a document to lay out the potential impacts and mitigation strategies for the proposed project. So the EAW process is a Minnesota state-specific process as outlined in state statute and Minnesota Rules 4410. You'll hear me reference back to that a few times. An EAW is completed by the responsible government unit, or the RGU, and in this case, the RGU is designated by Minnesota State Rules 4410, and it's the city of Edina. And for certain projects that exceed thresholds, or they go over potential criteria outlined in Minnesota Rules 4410, 4300, an EAW is required. So this project does fall into one of those categories. So some of the topics that are covered in an EAW, so as I had noted earlier, there are 20 standard questions on the EAW form, and those cover topics such as land use, water resources, surface waters, including in stormwater, contamination and hazardous materials, habitat and endangered species, water and sewer infrastructure, transportation, air and noise, and then cumulative. So for this project, as you can see, it meets the threshold or the criteria outlined in the Minnesota Rules 4410, 4300, subpart 32 for mixed use development. So this is just what was presented in the EAW. And so a mandatory EAW is identified. The EAW was completed by Kimley Horn on behalf of the city. And the EAW was distributed for a 30-day public comment period from October 26th through November 25th. And the EAW was posted on the city's website, and then also was distributed to the agencies on the EQB distribution list and was included on the EQB monitor on October 26th. So at this point, the RGU or the city responds to the comments and develops the findings and facts and conclusions document. And so based on the comments that were received on the EAW, the city did receive 7 comment letters, mainly from state agencies, Hennepin County, and then also the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. Those comments were responded to in the findings document, and that will be part of the official EAW record. So at this time, the EAW or the RGU would make a determination on the need for an EIS. And so that is based on Minnesota Rules 4410, 1700. The project does not have a potential for significant environmental effects. And at that time, the environmental review process is complete with a negative declaration of an EIS.
So in conclusion on that, so we would ask the city council in 2 weeks to make that negative declaration. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mike Spack, and Mike also prepared the traffic analysis for the EAW and the project. So Mike, if you are.
Yes, thank you, Carrie. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Good to be back with you. Mike Spack, president of Spack Consulting. And we went through our standard traffic and parking study process for the development. The development will generate approximately 4,000 vehicles in and 4,000 vehicles out per day. And we studied France Avenue, 70th, York, and Hazleton, bounding the site and all of the key intersections. We found one hotspot is the intersection at France and 70th. As anyone familiar with the area knows, it can get congested in the evening rush hour. And to maintain the level of service, we need to add a northbound to eastbound right turn lane. We need to change the striping for the eastbound traffic to allow 2 through lanes to go through the intersection. And we're going to carry that eastbound traffic on the east side of the intersection into that right turn lane into the site. With that, we'll be able to maintain the existing level of service. And the right in, right out on France Avenue for the site, Carrie talked about needing to put a right turn lane in there, and that intersection is key to alleviating some of that pressure at France and 70th. So that's important. The third and final takeaway from our study is related to the parking. The city code would require just under 1,400 parking stalls. Now with the revised site plan, they're a little under 1,200. And we estimate the peak parking demand to be right around 1,000 vehicles. So we feel that I believe they're about 1,170, just under 1,200 stalls. They're in that appropriate range to meet the peak parking demand.
Thanks, Mike. So to wrap it up for staff, we have provided alternatives for the council to consider for approval and denial of the project. As I mentioned, Planning Commission and staff are recommending approval. And the applicant, I want to just mention again, has responded to some of the concerns of the Planning Commission, reducing the drive aisle widths down to 20 feet, adding more green space to the project. It ends up being about a 9% increase in green space, and then making those adjustments to the site plan for the U.S. Bank site to try to address that 50-foot setback and some of the concerns there. So with that, I will stop and we can answer any questions you may have. The development team is also here to make a presentation.
All right, let's first find out if any council members have questions for you, Director Teague, or for Ms. Payne or Mr. Spack. And Kevin Staunton, Member Staunton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have questions for all 3 staff reports. Let me start with Mr. Teague. We have had some commentary that has come in from Better Together and emails we've received that have suggested that this project is contrary to the comprehensive plan. I don't see in your report any requirement that we amend the comprehensive plan. Why is that?
That is correct. We don't have height standards in the comprehensive plan. It's a zoning decision. The density that's proposed here does not exceed the 150 units per acre. So there's no amendment needed to the comprehensive plan. It's just the rezoning, requesting flexibility to some of those zoning standards that I outlined.
And as we make this decision about rezoning, we do have something in the comprehensive plan to help guide us, though, don't we? The Greater Southdale District Plan.
We do, and the plan does reference the design experience guidelines as being a tool to help us with those zoning decisions.
So to be clear, the Greater Southdale District Plan is a part of the comprehensive plan. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then part of that implementation is the design experience guidelines.
That's correct, to assist us in making those zoning decisions. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then for Ms. Payne, as we're making these decisions on whether we need an environmental impact statement or not, are those the criteria that are in section 4410.1700?
Correct. That outlines like the significant environmental effects. So in going through the EAW, it analyzes, like we had identified, numerous different topics, and the potential impacts for the project, and then mitigation strategies outlined to mitigate those potential impacts.
Okay, thank you. And then Mr. Spack, with respect to this right turn lane, I understand that you're indicating that we need to install a right turn lane on France, on the northbound segment of France, at where traffic would enter the site at what would be 71st Street. Is that right?
Yes, at the right in, right out access, right by the U.S. Bank. We feel that right turn lane would be a safety enhancement, given the increased traffic there.
Can you describe that a little bit for me, just so that I understand why that's a safety enhancement, why you need that?
I'd have to dig in the study, but I believe we have more than 100 vehicles in the peak hour wanting to make a right turn there into the site. And that amount of traffic breaking in a through lane on France Avenue with the platoon signal timing, the county definitely sets up the corridor to be moving through traffic. So having that refuge island to get the decelerating traffic out of the through lane will help the whole corridor. And we know that the signalized intersections along there are bottlenecks.
But it would be a fourth lane in essence, because there are 3 lanes of traffic already. Is that right?
Yes.
So in your analysis, did you spend any time thinking about or examining the notion of future interior streets? As you may know, the district plan and the design experience guidelines really are advocating for a transformation of these super blocks into smaller networks of side streets, if you will. And I'm wondering if there was any analysis of that potential future dynamic. I understand for now there's just going to be 2 outlets. There'll be the right turn outlet at 71st, and then there'd be the roundabout at Ewing, or turn at Ewing anyway. Did you do any analysis of what the future might be once more streets would go through into that interior network?
No, that would be a much larger scale traffic study that would need to be done for the whole sub area to be able to do the forecasting and predict what redevelopment is going to happen there. Our study was just focused on this site for the AAW.
Okay. I understand. So let me ask you this, just in your experience, what is the chance that if we put this turn lane in, and in the future there is a more full interior street network, that we will ever get that turn lane removed?
Oh, that's putting me on the spot with trying to predict the future. If I had to bet, I would bet that turn lane would stay in the future. But future traffic studies could be done that line up when France Avenue would be rebuilt to then remove that curb.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate all those answers. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Member Staunton. Member Fisher?
I'd like to follow up on Councilmember Staunton's questions related to turn lanes. I share his concern about the turn lane going into the 71st, just because it constricts what we're trying to achieve, which is that 50-foot buffer there. In your report, you talk about these dedicated, throughput right turn lanes that are through, if I'm understanding, that would be on 70th going east.
Yes.
And I think you're promoting adding yet another one at the intersection going north on France. So am I reading that right?
Yes. With the congestion in this area, we needed every little bit of improvement. I typically don't like right turn lanes. They obviously widen the crossings for pedestrians. So I'm very careful when I recommend right turn lanes, but in this case, up at 70th, we need it for the capacity, and that intersection is forecasted to be quite a bottleneck in the future.
So so the question I have is, I'm reading in your report that we need to add those. I'm looking at site plans that don't illustrate those, I don't believe. Or did I hear you just speak a little bit ago that it's really a repainting opportunity, not a widening? Can you speak to that?
Yes, on the west leg, it is repainting of the intersection. On the south leg, so on the west leg for eastbound traffic, that is repainting. When we get to the southeast corner of the intersection,
I'm sorry, I can't envision the west lane, the west of what? Can you reorient us a little more? I can't understand which direction you're talking about in response to Mr. Fisher's question.
Eastbound 70th, as you come up to the traffic signal at the intersection, we'll have to change the paint on the road to change the lane configuration. As you are going northbound on France Avenue coming up to the intersection, we are recommending adding a right turn lane. And then on the eastern leg of the intersection, going away from the intersection, because of the painting we're doing on the west side, we have to carry a through lane across the intersection that doesn't exist right now. So that would drop into the right turn lane. You can see it's tapered there right now. We're just extending that, we're squaring off that taper. So it goes straight into the right turn lane that goes into the development. Thank you, Chad.
So to be clear, if we were to follow through on your recommendations, all of that's, or some of the landscape, some of the sidewalk, the design's going to have to be reconfigured based on what we're seeing right now.
I believe that, I guess I'll let the applicants talk to what stage their site plan is at.
We can talk to that later. I just wanted to get clear about where we're expanding curb width and where we're not. Thank you.
Anything else, Member Fisher, at this point?
Nothing for me right now, thanks.
All right, Member Brindle.
So just taking off on that right turn lane, Mr. Spack, I'm not going to let you go yet. If I'm going north, Mr. Spack is in an hourglass. So Chad, where's Chad? There he is. Well, I'll ask my question and we'll see. So A is the in-out that's being discussed. If I'm going north on France to get into this property, is the in-out a new in-out, or is it the existing in-out that we see there?
The existing in-out at the cursor.
Okay. So, all right, then the right turn lane, is that a right turn lane that would have a curb protection from the northbound lanes of France as it is? Let's see, is it that way at Byerly's? It might be that way at Byerly's. Is there a curb protector there, or is this just simply another lane via narrowing the other lanes?
It would be just another lane like up here at 69th, the Galleria. It's a right turn lane, but it'd be really a short one, kind of almost like this one in Galleria.
Okay, I see. All
But
right.
it would be down here. Yeah.
All right. And it would not involve narrowing the through lanes on France Avenue.
No.
Okay. All right. That was my question. Thank you.
Member Anderson, anything right now?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Spack, while we're on the 70th conversation, now I'm reading the transportation report from Andrew Scipione, and he mentions that 70th and France intersection will hit the almost congested level. I'm not quite sure what that means, but he references that as a volume capacity at near 0.8. And he also talks about the corrective measures that you're describing, which are probably adequate at this time pulling in there. But he goes on to say that ultimately leads to negative impacts on other modes of transportation that might be anticipated in the future. So I wonder, could you comment on that and kind of clear that up for me?
Yes, things rarely break down and get to a volume over capacity of 1.0. That is gridlock. So it is a gradation, and we are getting in that congested area time period during the evening rush hour. So we're getting close, but with the improvements we're recommending, things aren't going to be worse than they are today, or actually pre-pandemic levels. We analyzed both pre-pandemic and current congestion levels and forecasted multiple ways to make sure we were making appropriate recommendations. Yes, when we are widening intersections, and I did mention I generally don't like right turn lanes because they do make the crossings wider for pedestrians and bicycles. So it is a trade-off, and this is one of those rare instances where the right turn lanes add just enough capacity to a very congested intersection that intersections operate on a through F scale, but unlike school, we have level service E. Generally in the Twin Cities, the level service DE boundary is what we're trying to design up to, but not over. We don't want it worse in going into E territory. Right now, the intersection operates at level of service D, a congested level of service D. With the added traffic from the development, it would go into level of service E. The improvements that we are recommending would allow the intersection with the development to still operate at level of service D. So that is the mitigation we're proposing.
Okay, and so his assessment, there was quite a bit of conversation, as I'm sure you recall, in the Planning Commission hearing about future transit and how that might affect the parking, which is probably adequate at this time, how that might affect the parking. It's, a little bit under zoning requirements right now, but in any event, how do you feel about that? His comment that it can lead to negative impacts on future transit coming in.
It is yes, we're in a multimodal balancing act, and there is tension between vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists and transit. And France Avenue is a congested corridor, so it acts as a reliever to Highway 100. The county has it set up to act as a reliever. I fully understand and support the city guidance to making this a more pedestrian-friendly area. There is transit out there on France and York in the rush hours, and as was discussed in the Planning Commission, transit follows the demand. So where there is demand for transit, that is where transit gets enhanced. So it's a little bit chicken and the egg. We need the intense development to then prove that there's enough density to then attract more transit.
Okay.
But there are already bus stops out there.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. The right in, right out on France. the right turn lane headed north that's what affects the setback for US Bank. I'll talk to the applicant about that. I don't know whether they tried to deal with that or what they're seeking exactly. Last thing, it's trip generation, because that's certainly going to affect that right out going north onto France. And it's the study indicates that we've got over 60%, I think, of trip generation is from the supermarket. Is the supermarket locked into the plan, or is that an applicant question?
That's an applicant question. That was the assumption we were given to study.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, thank you.
Member Brendel.
I have one more, and the experience that that I'm reflecting on is the building just to the west across the street where Roti is and maybe E-Trade is in there. So that building really addresses that corner. It's meant to look like a gateway. And that building was built, it was finished, and then the powers that be put these ugly utility boxes right on the corner in front of the main entrance of that building. And what are the chances that that could happen here, that this building at the corner of 70th and France addresses that area, creates a pretty gateway, and then these utility boxes show up? I know do you have an answer, Chad? That'd be great.
I can tell you what those utility boxes, those are the traffic control boxes for the signal. So those aren't needed on every corner of the intersection. They just happen to fall on that southwest corner.
Okay.
But there could be other utility boxes on this other corner. That'll depend on where the private utilities, the electric needs to come in, most likely. We never want those on the corners if we can avoid it. And that's
Right.
something the applicant will work with those private utilities to address.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, folks. Any other questions from council members? Otherwise, I've got a few. And Mr. Spack, hang in there with me. I'm looking also at Andrew Scipione's report, which is, I think, taking information from your work. You had mentioned in your testimony here a few minutes ago that you had looked at, I think, traffic volumes in 2018, which have been pre-COVID, and also volumes during the COVID period that we're in right now. And Scipione says that SPAC also noted that traffic volumes remain lower than 2018 levels due to the current effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. All study intersections are forecast to operate acceptably without mitigation. So do you want to comment on that as to the accuracy of that assertion from our staff?
Yes, yes, Mr. Scipione's memo is correct. Traffic volumes late this fall are about 30% below the rush hour traffic pre-COVID. So that the pandemic has really cured a lot of congestion in the Twin Cities. So that's a difficult position for Public Works folks to be in, trying to predict, is this a new normal or is congestion going to rebound? And we look at it both ways to present the full picture. And based on conversations with the county, they certainly want us to be analyzing, assuming traffic is going to rebound to pre-pandemic levels.
All right, so that brings me, that segues me nicely to that next question I have, and that is these deficiencies on France Avenue, West 70th Street, in view of the COVID era and the experiences we're having with volumes being 30% lower. What are you thinking of in terms of timing of these curative measures with respect to these deficiencies that you found based upon 2018 volume?
Yeah, this mitigation would not be needed with today's traffic volumes combined with the development traffic. So it is, the big question mark is, when is life going to rebound from the pandemic? And frankly, our office buildings and retail going to go back to normal? And there's tremendous debate about that. But these would not need to be built on day one to provide a good level of service. We're probably looking more at the 3 to 7 year range from now, when there would be enough congestion that we would really feel it.
But we need to be planning for it, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. This is for Director Milner. Have any preliminary conversations been held with Hennepin County with regard to the recommendation of Mr. Spack on the right in, right out at what would be the new 71st Street?
Yeah, myself and the applicant went and met with the county this fall and had a discussion about it. So they're reasonable and thinking that this would be a necessary part of the development. So we've been working with the county already.
Okay. All right. Now, this also brings me to this U.S. Bank setback issue. And, you know, if this is something that we think we need to be contemplating, it affects that 50-foot setback that's desirable based on the design principles. What are, and this may be for Carrie, and Chad, what are staff's thoughts relative to the U.S. Bank setback request at 30 feet and that issue, I mean, relative to the Planning Commission's condition that they imposed that it should be at 50 feet? What are staff's thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, I can go first. I'm not as troubled. I'm viewing it as a 40-foot setback. That's kind of where we're starting from. And it's that public space in front of the U.S. Bank building. That's the area of the bank that they're going to rent out as public space, all windows. So I'm not as troubled by that smaller building within that setback. We do have other, a lot of those newer buildings that were constructed on France were put in just a few years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago, but that was prior to our 50-foot standard. Should the U.S. Bank site ever develop in the future, I think we would probably want to hold to a 50-foot setback should something else go in its place. But the Planning Commission was quite adamant on the 50-foot setback.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at a setback site plan here where I'm looking at Bank of America. They're at 33 foot setback. The TD Ameritrade building, which is the companion building to what Member Brindle was talking about, that's got a 35-foot setback from France Avenue. Roti is at 28 feet. Room and Board's at 30. Current U.S. Bank's at 33. And Lunds Byerly's that we did recently is at a 30-foot setback. They've got a topographical grade change there, but that's still a 30-foot setback with a wide sidewalk. So I understand a little bit what you're talking about. Let's go to the parking analysis, and Director Teague or Mr. Spack can speak to this, but the national data that you pulled, Mr. Spack, the ITE data suggested that for what was proposed for the site, there'd be 966 parking spots. Your local data suggested that we needed 727 spots. Proposed are 1,202 in the code, required 1,385. Do you want to give us a little bit more detail around your conclusions that what the applicant is proposing is sufficient from a parking standpoint?
Right. So the way the data is collected is it's very much a snapshot in time. The national data is all volunteers like myself going out and collecting data during a weekday, during a weekend. We've taken it upon ourselves in our firm to collect a lot of this localized data, which ITE very much supports, using local data versus national data that may not match our context. So as a forecaster, it sure is appearing that a normal peak demand is in that 800 to 1,000 vehicles range. And based on some of the other parking in the area, I can understand the applicant wanting a little bit of a safety factor to have enough convenient parking and not be underparked on the site. So Compared to most of the developments in the area, they're not asking for too much of a safety factor, and certainly meeting the needs of the site, but coming in below the city code. So I felt like it kind of was in the reasonable range.
All right, thank you. And this, my last question is for Director Teague. You said earlier that the Planning Commission recommended approval of this with a couple of conditions where we'll have the applicant talk about some of those. One we've talked about, which is the setback on US Bank. But I didn't hear you make a staff recommendation. There is a staff recommendation, I believe. Can you indicate for me again, I'm sorry if I missed it, what the staff recommendation is with respect to the proposed approval of this project?
Yeah, staff is recommending approval also, subject to the findings and conditions that are in the approval resolution. And then the second part of it is on the EAW, we would recommend that an EIS is not needed for this project, that the mitigation is coming through conditions of approval. So it would be a negative declaration that an EIS is needed.
So when Kimley Horn says we did the EAW and no, you don't need to do an EIS after we evaluated the requirements for an EIS, you support that conclusion that no, we don't need to do an EIS?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Did that prompt any further questions for other council members? Okay. Director Teague, I think you might have indicated to the applicant that they'll have 20 minutes, and then we'll go into the public hearing portion of the matter. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, yes.
Okay, and who do we have with us this evening for the applicant?
I believe Ted Carlson is going to kick it off, and there's a few other members of their team, but I'll let Ted introduce them.
Oh, I had one further question, Mr. Carlson, before you start. I wanted to go back to, we've looked over the past few years at many of these letters written by our outside consultant, Mick Johnson from the Architectural Field Office, who helped guide that work on the design principles. I've never seen him recommend a project as earnestly as he recommended this one. Is that your recollection too?
Most certainly, yes. Yeah, I've never seen such a positive review.
Yeah, okay. All right, we can talk more about that later. Thank you. All right, Mr. Carlson, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mayor Hovland and council members for your participation and engagement tonight. I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes, and our team will do our absolute best to adhere to the 20-minute time lane. First of all, I want to start off by recognizing our project partners, and I'm going to share my screen here. Is that working?
It is now.
Okay, great. So first of all, we've spent a lot of time and effort with the Southdale Design Guidelines to develop a plan that really addresses the intent of what the city and community put together to guide future development and transformation of this area. So our team includes Mortensen Development, which is a very familiar and household name throughout Minnesota. Great legacy projects with stadiums and public works partnerships with medical providers. And I'm really excited to be in partnership with Mortensen on this project. And then ESG is leading our design team. And Neil Reardon and team have done a great job of putting together the presentation you'll see in a few minutes. We also want to thank US Bank and RSP, because without their forward thinking and looking to modernize their operations and efforts, we wouldn't be in a position to expand upon the Southdale Design Guidelines. So we're excited to get into this project tonight and talk a little bit more. I'll kick it off here. I'll pass it to Brent Webb at Mortensen, who will talk about some of our affordability initiatives and workforce diversity that Mortensen's done such a great job leading. We'll then have Neil Reardon with ESG review our plans. And lastly, but certainly not least, Jeff Huschlin, with RSP, will talk about the US Bank site specifically. But before we start, this is my fourth project in front of this council within the last 4 years. And Councilmember Brendel and Councilmember Fisher have been a part of the previous three projects. So being that this is the second to last public hearing. I just want to say from an Edina resident whose kids are in Edina schools and I've lived here for almost 20 years, I thank you for your service and wish you the best of luck in whatever you choose to do next. So with that, a quick review of project dates. We were sketch planned in September. We've held 2 community meetings. We presented to Planning Commission on November 18th. We're in front of you tonight. I think it's important to recognize a little bit of the staging of this project. First of all, should we have success, we would look to begin construction of the new bank branch in the spring of 21. Complete that branch, get US Bank moved, and then start the remaining 3 parcels. As Carrie mentioned tonight, we're looking for PUD recommendation. After PUD recommendation, we would come back with the other 3 sites, A, B, and C, to talk about further site plan review and approvals. If all goes well and we're successful, we would look to start construction on the remaining parcels sometime winter of 21, spring of 22, and finish construction anytime between 2022, 2023, and 2024. So we've got a long-range lens on this project, which is partially due to A, the partnership with US Bank and relocating them, but B, also the climate that we're in today. So at Planning Commission, there was also another large project on the agenda, and I think that our team wanted to do a better job tonight of really telling our story. What's our why, and how have we engaged the community, the city, and businesses as we developed a plan? And so I've got just some quick talking points tonight to go over with you. And first of all, change is different, and change, sometimes we feel like we're losing something. And so what are we giving up in exchange for a project like this? And 3 kind of things that we hear of change in the development community are about height, density, and traffic. Neil Reardon will touch on height. Carrie had addressed density, where we're 45%. 55% less than the highest density guidelines within the district. And Mr. Spack talked about traffic, how we're out with minor improvements to France Avenue and 70th. We will operate at the same levels of traffic pre-pandemic. So as a development team, when we put together our focus of how are we going to develop this project, we think about height, density, and traffic and look to mitigate those ways with thoughtful development. So I then think about, okay, change is difficult. What are we giving up? And I look at the surrounding adjacencies and what is the site surrounded by? And when were they built? Southdale was one of the first malls in the entire world that was enclosed, and it was built in 1956 and has since undergone transformation. The Galleria was built in 76. Brandon Square, adjacent to this project, was built in 76, and Rue de France to the south was 1972. The US Bank branch was built in 1977. So when I think about what are these adjacencies, this is really the first opportunity to adhere to the aspiration and inspiration of the Southdale guidelines. And so we look to kind of set that benchmark, set that high hurdle for what may or may not happen throughout the rest of the Southdale area. I then think, okay, as we're the development team, how do we create a place that benefits the community? How do we live, work, and play in one place? And we do that by creating different types of uses. We look at the framework vision. What are we looking to replace? We're looking to replace surface parking. We're replacing projects that have 0 sustainability initiatives and minimal pedestrian experience. There's no super block. There's no connectivity. There's no pedestrian experience. There's no public space, no gathering space. And so instead, what do we put together on this project? Well, it's 195,000 square feet of office, commercial, retail space. That's jobs. That's an economic driver that plays upon the corridor that France Avenue is of medical excellence, of office excellence, of retail excellence, of the crown jewel of retail in the Minneapolis MSA, which is the Galleria next door. We create sustainable and innovative design. We manage the stormwater. There's none now. We get rid of the surface parking. It's all structured parking. We create varied housing choices for people to choose from. Everything that really kind of benefits the community is here within this project. So we really create alignment further with the design guidelines. And we'll talk about the super block and the street rooms and the connection and all these other things we talk about, but really how do we make it accessible? And that's a multi-layer accessible. And that talks about also affordability and sustainability. So Neil Reardon's going to touch on sustainability in a minute, but I'd like to have Brent Webb with Mortensen talk about affordability and some of the diversity initiatives that our team has for this project.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Carlson. Mr. Webb, welcome.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members. We wanted to touch on this again because this is a question that we get often, and we just wanted to be very clear again that we are committing 100% to complying to the city's policy for affordable housing. One thing that we really haven't mentioned yet, which is a longer answer, is the work effort that we've done to date to be able to understand what our strategy could be. So we've had multiple conversations with Stephanie Hawkinson. We've actually also had some conversations with Aon, PPL, Common Bond, and we're really working together as a team to fully understand what our strategy could be for sustainable, for affordable housing. And how we really think that's going to unfold is through our ultimate site plan approvals after hopefully the council approves our PUD request. I think more importantly, when we think Mortensen about affordable housing and inclusion and diversity, we think about the inclusion of women and minorities in business. And we have a proven track record, not only from our work at US Bank Stadium, but more recently in the city of Rochester with One Discovery Square, where we not only have met the standard that the city has put in place, but we've exceeded it because we have our own internal goals for workforce diversity. So I hope you can kind of hear that we understand the goals that the city of Edina has and how we hope to work with you to achieve the goals of affordability as well as workforce diversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb.
So thank you, Brent. I appreciate that. And lastly, I want to talk about our support for innovation and touch again on what we see as an economic corridor for Edina and really a regional hub, where as Mayor Hovland had mentioned and Director Teague had mentioned, we have a letter of recommendations from both Architectural Field Office in McJohnson and also from the Edina Chamber of Commerce. Two they took a look at our project and they like the way that fits with the Southdale design guidelines. So with that, I want to say thank you for hearing us tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to present. And again, our design intent was to address concerns and really set the bar for future Southdale development. With that, I'll pass it to Neil Reardon.
Mr. Reardon, you're there somewhere.
I am here.
Right.
Thank you, Mayor, and hello, council members. I'm going to share my screen here. One moment while I bring that up. Okay, everybody getting that?
It's up.
Okay, great. I will be relatively brief here. This evening here, a lot's been covered, and I understand there's a heavy level of familiarity already with the project. I do want to cover just very first, our sketch plan feedback and responses. We very much appreciated that level of commentary, questions, and feedback back in September. Additionally, we've also incorporated some revisions here tonight from 2 weeks ago.
Let me interrupt you. Would you give us your full name and your business address?
Certainly. Thank you, Mayor. I neglected to mention that. Neil Reardon, Project Manager, ESG Architecture and Design. We're located at 500 East Washington in Minneapolis.
Thank you.
So a few major bullet points that we heard from you. There were many more at Sketchplan, but just first one about people and green spaces. We heard that was very important. That came through in both rounds with the Planning Commission as well. Accommodate that future growth and that grid, that street grid pattern. And then lastly, the parking should be hidden and out of sight as much as possible. Additionally, in your packet, there's more information. One of the things we looked at in addition to all the sketch plan comments were the 9 things to remember about the experience design guidelines. These are evident in our changes, but I wanted to note those here as well. I know you're very familiar with those as well. So what I've included here tonight and what I want to focus time on was what we've changed mostly in the last 2 weeks and as responses to some of the conditions of approval approval. We have diagrams on the future block pattern. We have a diagram on bicycle parking, shadow studies, and height. We have a sustainability summary I want to put in front of you. And then lastly, really focusing all the content on those active streets and the people spaces. Additionally, there's lots of other content that was in your packet that I can bring up during the question and answer. So the conditions of approval we heard, the setbacks were already mentioned. We'll go into those in a moment. The street widths, accommodating a 20-foot drive lane as a reduction from 26 feet. I'll speak about that in just a moment. And then adding green space at the Plaza Park, as well as enhancing green space throughout all of the boulevard areas of the project. So a project overview very quickly. You've heard this already. Mainly what I'll hit on is there's 4 major development parcels, just to remind you, and they include all of these different uses. Site A, to refresh you, is the northeast quadrant, 24 stories, 270 units, 370 enclosed residential stalls, as well as 5,000 square feet of active retail flex space that fronts that new public park plaza. Site B is the office and commercial, mostly office and commercial portion of the site. It's 150,000 square feet of office space, 40,000 square feet of retail commercial at level 1, with associated parking for both. Site C, the southeast quadrant, to remind you, 110 units, 75 parking stalls associated with that, with a lobby and walkout stalls facing the level 1 streets at level 1. And then Site D, which is phase 1 of the project, as I already mentioned, the U.S. Bank part of the quadrant of the site at the southwest. Lastly, just touching on the site plan, it's a mix of hardscape, softscape. There's some rain gardens associated on the France Avenue setback. There's stormwater retention below this in the site, and we don't have a lot of large open space as was brought up with the Planning Commission, but the outdoor site spaces we feel like we're doing them really well and adhering to the experience guidelines, the street room typologies, those things. So then, just pivoting to the U.S. Bank and Southdale, by U.S. Bank relocating to this smaller parcel, it's really allowing for the rest of this development to take place on the other 3 quadrants. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jeff Hischelin with RSP to go over just, I think, 5 or 6 slides related to some of the modifications, revisions that have been discussed, and other details on the site plan for U.S. Bank.
Thank you, Neil.
Yeah.
Mayor Hovland, City Council members, thank you very much for this opportunity to present this evening. Again, my name is Jeff Hischelin. I'm an associate principal with RSP Architects, 1220 Marshall Street, Minneapolis, Minnesota. And again, we're really taking a look at the image that we have on. This is a really transformative project that the design team has really worked closely to try and make sure that all of the guidelines and goals are met. And specifically as it relates to the U.S. Bank function, I think Ted really touched on how this is really the catalyst for creating this bank site to really open up for future development and how this can really start to be a transformative design. And with that, there's a couple of key points. This location in particular is one of the top 4 performing banks in their portfolio and is a very critical element for the project that we're talking about bringing forward. And again, this was a site that was selected to do the very first flagship, their most robust offering for both transactional banking as well as financial management and wealth management. And those are really some key elements that we wanted to talk about as far as how it relates to the site plan that was initially submitted, and also to some of the talking points that we'll review here as some comments that we've heard from both Planning Commission and city staff. And with that, I think I'll probably talk a little more about what we'd initially submitted. If you take a look at the screen on the upper portion of that, you can see that there were 4 primary comments that were brought up from the City Commission. And essentially trying to stay with the spirit of how the Ewing Avenue can provide that extension to create this smaller grid configuration was really a key sensitivity. So we heard that loud and clear and brought some ideas together for that. We've also understand that the setback from France, as it exists in its current back of curb condition, was one of the elements that we felt again, as it's designed in the overall design experience guidelines, we do feel that some of the actual uses of this space, and as you can see in the plan, we've really developed a space which we're calling a community room. And this is space that is open to the public. This is meant to be kind of a public realm element. And you'll see that it was strategically placed on this site to really maximize that visibility and transparency, as Mr. Teague had mentioned earlier in the presentation. There was also discussion about making sure that there is maximizing our transparency on public-facing elevations, and we have responded to that in an architectural, in some of the renderings we'll share here in a couple of following slides. And one of the other comments was really trying to consider moving the sidewalk closer to the face of the building, which starts to create more of a landscape median and be able to actually provide some of the canopy tree planting that I think were really kind of the key elements desired by the city. So with that, I'll move to our alternative plan that we've got on the bottom. And again, as we take a look at some of the key elements, really it all starts down to what can we do to really enhance this overall development experience. And as we took a look at how can we start to take a look at Ewing Avenue and really make that a phase one element. Let's do it right out the gate. Let's make sure that that's built. Let's make sure that we can define that. I think the planning notes had said created as an easement. We said, let's take that a little further. Let's start to actually create that roadway so that it's very evident that that can be developed in the future. The other piece is really coming along to take a look at the facades and expanding the canopy, the median landscaping along France Avenue. So as you can see, we have done that and starts to create a very comfortable landscape median. We've got a couple of landscape planter walls to really, really play up the pedestrian experience as you move along France Avenue. And really to talk about the importance of the community room, this is an element as part of some of the guiding principles at US Bank that having this community activation space, it can be used in many different configurations from educational purposes to community uses, and it's really a key ingredient to this Bank of the Future concept that we're presenting today. And also taking a look at how can we make sure that we can create that transparency. And we have been able to go back and start to expand some of the glazing so that we have that strong connection, both looking into the building, but also looking out from the building. From there, I think we'll go to a couple of our three-dimensional renderings that kind of help depict on the streetscape and the landscaping of what we see being really critical. As compared to some of the prior renderings, you can see that when you add that landscape buffer, we see that there's some opportunities to provide some landscaping walls, some very design-sensitive planting species, and again, the canopy trees, but really focusing on having a very pleasant pedestrian and biking experience. You can go to the next slide. And again, what is this community room? It's actually meant to be something that has a high level of versatility, what it can be used for the community. Seating capacity right now is with 16 people in a configuration like this, or could be expanded with moving out the tables, but really wanted to make that an asset as it's adjacent to the public realm. Go to the next slide. And again, what are we going to see as we take a look as we go north? We really want to be sensitive on the planting, again, the canopy trees, creating that comfortable buffer so that it's not directly adjacent, and knowing that the traffic volumes are along France Avenue, how can we really try and respond to the comments we heard from the Planning Commission? And again, what is the entry arrival sequence coming in from the primary parking area? We will say that parking is a very, very key element for how the transactions are done in this branch bank. As we'd mentioned, financial services and wealth management is really an element that is oftentimes done in person. COVID has really kind of brought a little different, unique aspect to it, but the level of sensitivities for those conversations really are done in an in-person setting, in close proximity, social distance. And this really starts to tie into how we can make sure that the parking has a strong connection for the customer experience, as well as making sure it fits the goals and objectives for both site furnishings, bike racks, connectivity on the pedestrian scale. I think those are our talking points. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I realize we're up against time here, but I will summarize a few items that we've modified, as was already mentioned, the street width. So a couple of notes here. This section of street through here, the north-south street we're calling Ewing Avenue. And in that street, we had previously shown 26 feet in width for the drive aisle. We've since had conversations with city staff as well as interaction with the fire marshal on understanding if 20 feet is adequate. We have made that change to go from 26 feet to 20. And then along the other street, 71st, we are keeping that at 24. And the reason being is there's a delivery access route, as was already mentioned, going to this loading dock here. And that progression comes in southbound here and then westbound there, and so that distance there is needed for that particular maneuver. Here is a street section using the street typology 3 for Ewing Avenue. Again, this was a 26-foot drive lane previously, and we've narrowed that to 20 feet, and we've given 3 feet to each side on the boulevard. That 3 feet has been dispersed in the landscape zone on the boulevard here, as well as within the pedestrian through walk zone there. So that's the change to Ewing. Here you see a modified rendering we've done over the last 2 weeks to show that experience. One change would be the enhanced tree canopy, starting with some larger trees, allowing them a adequate planting bed, and then some significant vegetation down low. Additionally, another rendering looking north up Ewing, what you'd see on the street to the side there with that additional planting and that narrowed width of the drive lanes. So again, 20 feet there at Ewing and then 24 at 71st. Additionally, what we heard was the desire for additional green space at the park and plaza. So we've made some revisions to that and an increase to both the tree canopy as well as the vegetation that's down lower. We are straddling the balance here between hardscape and softscape. We understand we were probably a little on the high side on the hardscape previously, so we've made that change. What does remain consistent is the active use here at first floor of that flex retail space and how that would front the park and provide lots of opportunities for that park to be programmed with events or for it to be a quiet respite for residents, office workers, or someone who's not even working or living in this project necessarily, but it's just a passerby making that connection from one of the neighborhoods to the west to the promenade to the east. So this park is very much about all those uses. Here's a view looking east from the west end of that park and just showing some of the vegetation and that active use up against the building. We think that this could be programmed a variety of different ways. It could include potential locations for public art, but really lots of different types of seating, both permanent and temporary. Here's a winter scene of that with some ice sculpture, Christmas tree, people using that space all times of year. Again, that same view in a fall scene here, we see some of the leaves changing, but again, that enhanced landscape down low, those lower plantings, as well as a significant tree canopy to start with on day one when this project would be built. I have a number of other renderings. You've seen these before. No changes here, but just I'll tick through these very quickly in the interest of time to get to questions. Several street views here. That is building C there on the southeast quadrant, building A on the northeast quadrant, and building B on the northwest quadrant. A few more views of the streetscape. The podium of Site A. We can certainly come back to these with any questions. The entrance to the 24-story tower along 70th. Again, looking along 70th, and then back to the corner of 70th and France from the pedestrian view. Additionally, we provided some shadow studies. Those are there if there's questions related to height. Here's a view from 70th Street and Valley View Road west in the Cornelia neighborhoods. And then lastly, just a height comparison. This is a new exhibit we hadn't previously shown the Planning Commission necessarily, or anyone other than you. So this is a fresh one. Are showing our project here on the left at 285 feet, and that's to the very top of the mechanical screening zone, which you see is the highest part of the building there in the middle of it. So it'd be about 20 feet lower on the other parts. The Bauer project, which is just kitty corner next door at 208, the Edina Water Tower, the Westin, Minnesota Center, and then Wells Fargo Plaza about 3/4 of a mile to the south near 494, technically in Bloomington. Lastly, we wanted to address sustainability. Ted mentioned that was one of the items we didn't necessarily hit on with the Planning Commission, so they had a few questions about that. First and foremost, the most sustainable measure, in my view, of this project is that we're redeveloping a brownfield site. We're transforming that existing parking lot. We're dramatically improving the physical environment. And importantly, we're reusing existing infrastructure that's already there. We're leveraging that infrastructure. That's really important as a sustainability measure. We're adding density with the strong public realm. You know that. We're following those experienced design guidelines. They themselves are inherently pushing sustainability. Public green space. We just spoke about that, including it, but also doing it well. Promoting multiple transit options is what density does. You're not just only able to use a car, you're able to use a variety of sources or whatever you choose. Lastly, some of the other items, this is by no means an inclusive list, but green roofs are a part of the project. We will define exactly how much of that at a later date, but they're helping us with our stormwater. Additionally, our stormwater approach improves the existing conditions from that asphalt parking lot that's there today. It also has holding capacity and improves water quality as it discharges to the groundwater. Native landscaping, including electrical charging and car sharing, being solar ready, and doing organics recycling. And then lastly, our buildings are demanding a higher level of health and well-being. This includes, having the ability for people to actively use stairs, have good air quality, which is more important in the pandemic now than ever. So those are a small portion of our sustainable guidelines. Lastly, we wanted to, for the Planning Commission, show and annotate locations of bicycle parking both within buildings and on the boulevards. This slide does that. And then I think we spoke about the super block grid pattern extensions last time. Here you see in pink the streets that we're building, the ones in blue as the desired future potential locations. And again, panning out to that even larger super block of Southdale to the south, including the promenade, the existing built streets there in yellow, again, ours in pink, and potential connections in blue. Lastly, just pivoting back to those guiding principles and framework from the Southdale Experience Guidelines, the great framework that was set up there, and that, those were our North Star in both our initial concept as well as our revisions through this fall, through the process with the city. With that, I will just leave my screen open for questions from the mayor and the council members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon. Mr. Carlson.
Thank you, Mayor. We were over by 9 minutes, so sorry about that. But look forward to further dialogue.
All right, good. And Mr. Hirschland, please, a couple people, including you, pronounce your name, because it was really, when I see it on the screen, I can hardly wait to hear how it was pronounced.
Well, it's actually Hirschland, like Michelin tires. So
Hirschland. Okay, thank you. That's a good tip for all of us. I'd like
not the first time I've had to do it.
Yeah, I'd like to see somebody on the East Coast try to pronounce that.
It's interesting.
Better, your chances are better in Scandinavian country.
Yeah.
Anyway, council members, are there questions? We might need to go back to just a full screen here so that council members can see each other. You, yes, Member Staunton.
Just one off the top for Mr. Hirschland. Thank you for that tip. So I can recall the before and after, the initial proposal and the revised proposal for your corner of the site. But can you tell me how many parking spaces you reduced by reconfiguring that to allow the drive aisle for the southern half of Ewing.
I can. And Neil, can you pull that site plan up, or should I share it from my screen?
Yeah, it might be helpful to see it there because you can.
Yep, Jeff, I will pull it up right now.
Oh, okay. The initial submittal, I do know, had 31 parking stalls. And as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, and essentially that was the 11 stalls on the east side were really the compromise. As we took that and realigned the road with Ewing, we were able to get essentially 23 parking stalls. And then the discussion is how we could probably utilize some other parking areas. Typically, these branch banks park at 5 per 1,000 square feet, and they really find that utilization is very, very critical to their business operations. So does that answer your question?
It does. So you reduced by how many? I'm sorry, I lost the math there.
It's about 11 stalls.
Okay. And then if you were to move the building back off of France, would you have to reduce more parking?
Yes, and that's kind of the critical piece, and that's why we really wanted to illustrate that by what we give up on the east side of the site makes it so much more critical for us to make sure that we maintain that building placement as it's currently configured, because as you move that back, and let's say it did meet that 50-foot threshold, that would compromise at least another 5 to 6 parking stalls, which would drastically take down the capacity of what they have for convenient baking parking.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Member Staunton, at this point in time?
Not right now, thanks.
Okay. Other council members?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Member Fisher?
All right. As long as Mr. Hischlin's really paying attention, I'll just ask, did I hear right that you've added some transparency to the building from previous submittals?
We have, yes. From what was submitted at sketch plan, we had actually increased the amount of glazing on both the 71st Street. Well, you can see it on this on the 71st Street elevation. We've expanded the glazing that you can see right below the U.S. Bank signage, as well as the entrance portal. And then if you take a look, maybe it's a couple slides back, the France Avenue piece. Again, this community room, which we've been kind of discussing as this jewel box element, really is essentially floor-to-ceiling glass to really enhance that the transparency there. And as you can see a little further down, we've actually expanded some of the punched openings to be increased to really try and, again, provide the level of transparency in the public spaces of the bank, and also be able to provide a level of privacy for some of the financial conversations that take place inside of the bank.
Okay, thank you. I do like I think having that meeting room be a very transparent box could be an effective element. So, I have if Mr. Mayor, if I could just keep going a few things.
Go ahead.
Earlier, I had asked Mr. Spack about his recommendation on the traffic on the right turn lanes, and if I heard him correctly, and if I'm reading his report correctly, he's promoting not just the turn lane onto 71st, which we can see in the documents, but I think I heard him say we need a turn lane onto 70th, which I don't see in any of these documents. Can somebody speak to that from the design team? Is like, where are we with that? And would we need to modify that 50-foot zone if there's a turn lane there?
Councilmember Fisher, I can address that. If you look at the screen right now, I think the right turn lane that was talked about was where I'm pointing right here on 70th itself. So there's a through straight lane, I believe Mr. Spack was referring to, and then there's a right turn lane here, which then turns onto this north-south street, which we're calling Ewing.
Yeah, I was tracking that one just fine because that's mostly changing the paint and a little bit of straightening of the curb on the north side of the development, south side of 70th. What I'm speaking of is I'm driving north on France Avenue, and I've cleared 71st. I'm heading to 70th. I want to take a right turn. Am I hearing right that Mr. Spack is recommending a right turn lane there? And would that encroach on what we're seeing and your landscape and the sidewalks and everything. That's the one piece I'm still a little fuzzy on. I'm not sure what I'm hearing.
Yes, Mr. Fisher, the report clearly does recommend that right turn lane on France Avenue that you're mentioning and is not shown here.
And tell me again how critical that right turn lane is.
We had to squeeze every drop out of the intersection improvements to be able to meet that level of service D threshold. But again, that is matching pre-pandemic conditions. As the mayor pointed out, we're in this kind of unsettled times that if we never rebound back to congestion the way it was before the pandemic, we would not need that right turn lane.
I mean, at that point, France Avenue has 3 through lanes, doesn't it? Plus a left?
Yes, but most of the other intersections along France do have right turn lanes.
Right. All right. I just wanted to get that clear in my head and make sure everyone understands what we're talking about there. So thank you for that. Others can jump in. I will have more questions, but I don't want to.
No, Member Fisher, go ahead while you're ask your other questions as well. Unless you want someone else to go first while you think about some of those other topics.
Well, I guess one thing, by the way, the renderings and all of that is beautiful and it makes it easy to understand. The one thing that, unless I was just missing it in my packet, there was reference to building plans like floor plates and such. I did not see them anywhere in my packet. And if someone could, either from staff or the team, could respond if those are available, I just want to make sure I have a chance to look at those between this meeting and the meeting where we ultimately make decisions. So what's hard for me to tell with all of the renderings that are in the packet is what is that experience, the pedestrian experience, when you're on Ewing, you're on the east side of Ewing, walking by what's building A, we'll call it. Yeah. So if I could magically push myself up that sidewalk and look to the right, I believe that's parking on the other side of that wall. Or do you have some buffer space in there? What's my experience as a pedestrian? What am I looking at when I look to the right?
Sure, I can address that, council member. There is a portion of that right where you see beyond this drive access aisle and going north of there, where there is parking along that wall. What we've done on that facade is articulate it with some openings so that it's not a continuous blank wall. But you're correct in that this little portion here mid block on the one side it does not necessarily have an active use as in people space directly inside the building. So there is parking in that zone. I can move to a rendering of that if here's just to the left, very left-hand side of that, you can start to see some of the articulation of that level 1 facade there. There is a few doors along that from the parking, and then further north, the residential lobby for Building A.
And again, I'm sorry to jump right to a detail like this, but frankly, everything was so well illustrated in the whole development. This is just the one piece I couldn't really grasp how you were dealing with it architecturally. So I'm trying to grasp, is there some material or barrier or screen between you and the vehicles, or is it kind of open, or is it, I'm just trying to, how direct am I? Because I understand there's going to be parking back there, and it's actually okay to have the visual connection to know where your parking is, but just how you're treating the wall, I guess.
Certainly, I think the council member, the view I have up now actually captures that area. So you can see here on the north, this is the entry from the residential lobby, which would go right out onto Ewing near the northwest corner of Site A. And then I think the area where I was pointing to in plan and the area you're referring to is this zone right along here. So you can see the articulation of openings along there that would look into that enclosed parking area. And then here's where that drive aisle access point, vehicular drive aisle access point is right there.
Okay, so you're treating it more like a glass storefront. It just happens that you're looking into the parking field.
That's right. For most of this portion, that's true. There is a portion here where you're actually looking into enclosed building space of the lobby and/or amenities of the residential building.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And if somebody at some point, after this meeting, unless I just missed it someplace, I would love to be able to see what was referred to as there was a whole index of drawings, just to see the interconnection between the uses and all of that would be helpful.
I can quickly respond to that and then let staff follow up. But there was a separate PDF which included all the building plans and full elevations, and that was submitted as a separate document to the supplemental PDF, which was more of the document you saw with renderings and other exhibits. So 2 PDFs, both were submitted. Apologies that the one didn't get you, but I'll let Director Teague, speak to that if you wish.
And maybe it's just me geeking out on the architecture part, but I like to, see how things work together. So.
No, I'd like to see it too.
Yeah, so I'm trying to open my packet. There's 2, and my computer's not letting me open it. So I can't verify if the plans that were submitted were the ones they're referring to. Maybe we didn't get it. If we didn't, we will certainly include it in the packet for next time. In fact, I can email it out to the council.
Carrie, there's a part 1 and a part 2 with a lot of text in part 1, more graphics in part 2. And I think it was in part 2, it references, an index with, 20 drawing sheets or whatever, which would be the more detailed floor plans, site plans with notations. I mean, I could pick up most of what I needed, but I think just, before we get to any decision making, I'd want to see it.
Yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of attachments. We may have missed that when we picked it up from Planning Commission and copied it over. So we'll make sure we get that right.
Okay. I have a lot of notes here, so I'm sorry. I don't want to. I think I'm good for now, and I'll if it's all right, Mr. Mayor, I'll chime in later if I.
Sure, you're welcome to do so. Member Brindle or Member Anderson?
Sure. So, couple things. The setback on US Bank. When we looked at this, the last time we looked at it, I suggested that I liked US Bank closer to the curb, and I feel like the visibility is important, being kind of mid-block there, if you will. And so I would not change the setback on US Bank. So adding the turn lane, making the setback more like 30 feet, that doesn't bother me. And I think the mayor's description of the different setbacks in the area across France, as well as on this side of France, on the east side of France, it is not going to stand out as being too close to France or any closer to France, frankly, than other buildings along the way. So I would not change a thing. So as I look at the spines in the development and looking at Ewing Avenue, thank you, looking at Ewing Avenue, and as that approaches Hazelton, it's a no outlet. And it's 20 feet wide, it's a no outlet. What happens when somebody drives down there? Is there enough space for them to turn around, or how are they going to get themselves out of that no outlet?
Neil or Jeff, can you address that?
I'll start, and so I think your question is if they were progressing south here on Ewing, how and they come to a stop and they need to get out of the development, they need to get back to France or elsewhere. Where do they go?
Well, your cursor is now at the corner of 71st and Ewing. What if they proceed south to Hazelton where there is no outlet? How do they get out?
So I think I can answer that question. You wouldn't be able to reach Hazelton from this development. There is a existing strip mall to the south of this project with any connection to Hazelton through the site
Okay,
at present.
I got it. So the easement that was drawn in blue does not mean that's going to be opened up. That means there's an easement there for future.
Correct. Neil, do you have that street diagram available?
Okay,
There you go.
that helps.
That'll help.
Okay, yeah, all right. I totally took that and said, what are we going to do when they get stuck? All right. So I'm looking now at pervious surfaces. So in the plaza area, along sidewalks, what have you got in this development that is permeable?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember. I will kick that question to Terry Manerick with Confluence. He's our landscape architect to talk about amount and percentages of that in the project, both in the boulevard as well as at the park and plaza area.
Okay.
Yeah, so as part of the development, wherever we have decorative paving within the development, we're showing a permeable paving. So I know, Neil, it might make sense to bring up like some of the streetscape shots, the plaza shots, but within the plaza, everywhere we have that decorative kind of yellow colored limestone paving there, that is permeable paving. As well as you notice in the street section where the sidewalks are kind of the standard gray. And then when we get into the landscape and pedestrian site furnishing zone, that becomes a paver. That also is permeable paving. And then also along France, we have a section within that area that takes a France side sidewalk, but it also has an internal sidewalk that pulls the pedestrian away from France. That kind of creates more of a slower pace of movement that might be separate from bike or somebody who's passing through quickly. And within those areas, we have these intersection points that create these plaza spaces, which could be moments for art, but also begin to define the corners. And each of those kind of off-colored spaces are also permeable paving as well.
Okay. All right.
And then that happens as well at the residential building and kind of around the development.
All right. Okay, so I'm sensitive that we have not started our public hearing yet, so I'm going to hold the rest of my comments and questions, but those are the things I wanted to lead with. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Member Anderson, anything for the applicants at this point in time?
You know, I do, Mr. Mayor. It's just that I have quite a few questions, and I'm sensitive as well to the public in queue. So if we're going to continue this discussion, I would just as soon hold my remarks.
Sure, we can do that. If you've got questions you want to hold until we get done with this portion of the public hearing.
Okay, great. Thank you.
It'll be open until November 9th, but we can certainly do that. Or if there's something that's
well, once I start, I'm gonna. Okay, let's go. Couple of things, you know, and many of my questions, some of them at least, have been answered along the way, but I do want to start by commending the look of the project. It was pretty scant in the sketch review, and I think that the project itself, the design elements are very attractive, and so I want to commend you on that, and I further want to commend the design team in incorporating many of the design elements into it. I think you've done as good a job as you can given what you're trying to accomplish. So thank you for that. Some clarification on street widths would be helpful for me. The Planning Commission was firm, and I understood their concerns about shrinking, especially the north-south Ewing, to 20 feet. And then, of course, you had to keep the 24 on 71st. I understand that. It's turning radius and deliveries that has to be taken into consideration. What comes up for me is when those streets shrink to 20, given the level of delivery and the nature of the delivery vehicles, I'm wondering about emergency vehicles needing to be there at the same time. And if so, are those streets going to be adequate? Are we going to have trouble down the road in creating 20-foot widths today, thinking that we may actually need something wider?
I can address the first part of that question, and then I'll refer to city staff if they would like to follow up on it.
Weigh in.
So we received an email forwarded to us from city staff from the fire marshal regarding the 20-foot question on Ewing. At that point, we were considering any street to go to 20 per the planning commission discussion, and we understand that a 10-foot drive lane each way at those locations was adequate. And then additionally, I would note that there parallel parking in most locations on each side of that street, the 8.5 feet of the parallel parking zone. But with that, I could defer to Director Teague or Chad Milner on further clarification of staff's viewpoint on that.
Okay.
Yeah, Councilmember Anderson, this is Chad Milner. The 20 feet is plenty wide for these internal routing of streets, especially when there's parking along the edges. I think it's a real benefit for those pedestrians at the bump outs. Really short crossings there. And most of the traffic's entering those parking ramps. So just that egress in and out, I think they've addressed the concerns with those truck movements in that other street that's 24 feet wide.
Okay. And it's good that it adds to the sidewalk width, so I think that's good. A couple of points that came out of the development review. One is relatively minor, but a good thought to consider additional pedestrian and bike crossings to Brandon Square on the east and Rue de France on the south. Is that something that you'd consider? Or maybe I didn't see it incorporated in, but I wonder if that's something that could be done.
I can speak to what we currently, Councilmember Anderson, I can speak to what we currently have. The bike connection, which is called for and already somewhat there, would allow you to proceed east to Brandon Square via this crosswalk just south of the roundabout. So that is an existing connection which would take you east towards the promenade by Brandon Square. I think your question maybe is about future other connections to Brandon Square. I think we would want to provide the opportunity here at this intersection for future connections. At this time, they just have a surface parking lot, in this zone, which my mouse is over highlighting right now. So we don't have a direct connection at this particular time, but I would say that the layout of this street does hopefully informs the ability for that future connection to be made in those locations.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then stormwater utility. The development review, Russ Bentner's report, talks about questions relative to the lift station, the stormwater connections, the storm sewer gaps. He also notes that there's less surface parking, but there's actually an increase in pervious surface from the current site. So stormwater, how, and I know you've touched on it and mentioned a couple of things. I wonder, could you drill down on that just a little bit about stormwater management?
Certainly, I'll start and allow Terry to supplement. The main stormwater tank is here in this section between sites A and B below grade under Ewing Avenue, and that retention area is the spot we have to utilize where there's not building. Additionally, there are rain gardens here along France, which are handling a decent amount of heavy stormwater, heavy event content when that happens, but most of the time those would be dry and landscaped zones that Terry was already mentioning. Terry, would you care to supplement the stormwater response?
Yeah, I can add to that. I think one of the big things to keep in mind here is that the existing condition of the U.S. Bank site is a surface flood condition. It actually is meant to handle more stormwater runoff than the actual site needs to handle itself. So it's kind of a flood condition on the surface treatment of a parking lot, which isn't very good as far as stormwater treatment goes. It's grabbing a lot of the oils and the salts and a lot of the different chemicals that could be part of what's brought into a parking lot condition. So this condition that we're proposing here will address some of that by gathering it, putting it into underground storage, and pre-treating it before it actually goes into groundwater. We're also doing some underground storage along France as part of that rain garden or bioretention area, as we call it, as part of that buffer zone that creates the pedestrian environment there as well. And then also there's the potential for us to do some of that similar development within the U.S. Bank site as well, whether that's along France or actually within the parking lot. I think one of the big things to keep in mind here is that a lot of the condition for stormwater runoff here that you see on site is also supplemented by the amenity deck situations or rooftop conditions that will be part of some of these buildings being constructed. Within the residential development, we'll have a large amenity deck that'll have a lot of green space within it that'll begin to slow down that runoff rate, not only at the amenity deck level above the parking, but also on the top of the structure. And as you can see in the distance, the B building that is on the corner of 70th and France has a lot of different rooftop conditions that will actually have green space as well to reduce a lot of that stormwater runoff from that impervious condition that's been created by a rooftop. So, and I think, you know, whether or not that happens with the Seaside building, there's potential for that as well. So I think there are a lot of different opportunities, as well as the permeable paving that we have in those areas that we mentioned to Councilmember Brinder that'll begin to capture a lot of that stuff, as opposed to a traditional parking lot of bituminous that would just merely run that off as part of stormwater.
Okay. Director Milner, is that, how do you feel about that? Are you comfortable with those items?
Yeah, staff has been meeting with the watershed and the applicant. We think they're well on their way to meet those requirements.
Okay, great, thank you. Question on sustainability. I know that there was discussion in the sketch plan review about a rooftop solar ready status. And that kind of goes along with another question you mentioned earlier, Mr. Reardon, about air filtration or air quality, especially in the A tower. So I guess I'm wondering about the solar ready as opposed to installing solar, or at least common areas right now, whether that would be something that could be considered. And then a comment, if you don't mind, about any extraordinary air filtration or air handling systems that you have.
Certainly, Councilmember Anderson. On the first item, I can say that you know, the sustainability questionnaire that which we've completed and sent to staff and has been reviewed does mention the need to be solar ready. So I think the project is ready to do so. The opportunities exist, you know, at some of these call them podium rooftops, and what we've determined so far is we haven't gotten into the details of programming those spaces. So the allocation of rooftop areas, be they at the podium or at the very tops of the buildings, has not been made yet because we haven't programmed and cost detailed those. But I think I can confirm, and Mr. Carlson or Mr. Webb, feel free to supplement my commentary, but I think we can confirm that we would be solar ready, but we don't know the areas just yet of those configurations. And so
yes,
that would be the status at this time.
Yes, we will be solar ready.
Solar ready, right? Parking. The parking, I think you're adequate, especially given Mr. Spack's analysis, and I think you're okay on parking. With a question though on Site C, and maybe a couple of other questions on the workforce housing. On Site C, we've got my notes. Excuse me. 110 units, 75 enclosed parking spaces. So that leaves about 32% of those residents, assuming that they don't have vehicles. And I'm wondering, how is that arrived at? Would be the biggest question, I guess.
Brent Webb, would you care to answer that question regarding parking ratio versus unit count?
Sure. Thank you, Neil. Thank you for the question, Council Member. So as we've been thinking about the project holistically, you know, obviously we've been trying to get the support for the PUD first. So our plan was to submit a concept with the amount of units that you just stated with the parking ratio that we thought was appropriate. But I think as we go further and actually submit for site plan, that is something that we're going to be developing further. So we might have some flexibility to modify the unit count as well as modify the parking ratio accordingly as we continue to evaluate that location specifically after the PUD approval. So it's definitely something that's a little fluid. We're obviously trying to understand also how that eventual project will unfold, but we think that we're currently appropriately parking that building right now.
So it sounds like that's something you'd like to come back to, or you may consider coming back to. I don't, the 32% is bothering just a little bit. I think that is underparked. I think your total spaces are okay. But I just think that X number of people are going to have cars that don't have parking spaces, and they will find a place to park on site, which maybe that's okay. It's just a matter of where and how you manage that. All right. The unit mix, I guess, on the workforce housing is a little bit of a concern. If you're going to have larger units or anticipate any kind of family dwelling there, we'd probably be a little short on recreation or green space. That's probably true through the whole district there. It would be especially true if you would anticipate family life there.
Councilmember, was that a specific question that you wanted me to respond to?
Yes, thank you.
Again, I think it's still something that we're developing specifically with that Site C. I know that we've contemplated that as workforce housing before. I think we've kind of taken a step back after we've had some conversations with Stephanie Hawkinson as well as other potential partners for affordable housing. And we haven't fully developed that. And that's why we've said that it's really something we're going to develop in more detail when we go back for site plan approval. So that location, Site C, might not actually be the workforce housing. So again, that's...
Yeah. And Brent, if I could piggyback on that for one moment, Councilmember Anderson, part of, as you pay attention to the design guidelines, and we've talked about, over and over again, we need to come back for site plan review. So there is a secondary approval step here. But on top of that, with different advances in technology and shared services, there may be overnight parking stalls available within the commercial office towers. There may be overnight stalls available to residents of site that we're talking about in the adjacent multifamily tower. What we're trying to do is create the most sustainable, forward-thinking, modern design that we can, and understand further as we further evaluate these sites what synergies may exist.
And then Councilmember Anderson, I'll just answer the last part of that question. I think your question is apt about, family space, depending on the demographics of that Site C building, where's the opportunity to be outside. There is I think 80 to 90% of those units do have balconies, but then most importantly, there is a roof deck here, which I'm highlighting with my mouse on the rear southeast portion of that building pad at level 2. So there's an ample outdoor space, and that would be programmed depending on the demographic within that building.
Okay, well, that's all I have for right now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Member Anderson. This is more of a process question, but I think it goes to what some of the questioning was from Member Anderson. But Director Teague, I was thinking about this in the context of the U.S. Bank, and it's going to probably attenuate some of the questions that I've got. But if this were approved for rezoning from PCD3 to PUD, and we approve a subdivision, and we make a decision on the EAW based on the EAW as to whether an EIS is needed, and we say no, it's not needed, then what happens next? I think, and that goes to the questions that Member Anderson was asking and some of the applicants' team were responding to. So U.S. Bank, for example, that's phase 1. It seems to me like this is like 6600, 6800 Avenue in France. If you approve what would amounts to a master plan, then you got to come back for each phase of it to get subsequent approval. So the bank, for example, because they're leading off, has to come back with a plan that we find acceptable within the master plan and also with respect to materials and architecture. Is that a fair recitation of what we are seeing coming from a process standpoint?
Mr. Mayor, yes, that is fair. Their next step would be final rezoning, overall development plan for the whole site, and then a final site plan for the U.S. Bank. So that would be, at that time, we would want to work out the specifics of how the affordable housing would work. We would want to write that into the PUD. But when the next phases are ready to go, they would then have to come back for site plan review. So let's say it's the retail building. That would go before Planning Commission and then City Council to approve just a site plan, and we're comparing it to the master development plan to make sure it's consistent.
All right, so we're going to go from a 50,000 foot view and make potentially some broad decisions, and then we'll get into more detail as we proceed further into the potential approval of the individual elements of the development.
That's correct.
All right. Okay. I think that causes me not to need to ask the questions I was going to ask Mr. Hischeln at this point in time. So I think we'll just turn now to, unless that line of questioning from other council members caused some of the council members first asking questions, like Member Staunton or Member Fisher, to want to follow on with some of the other questions from Member Brindle and Member Anderson. Otherwise, let's go to the public hearing. So we're now going to hear, I'm going to open this matter up for public testimony. So we're now going to hear from residents who would like to provide testimony in this matter, either in favor or against. Remember to call in at 800-374-0221. Conference ID number is 154-8149. 154-8149. An operator will ask for your name and street address, put you in the queue to speak, and then Director Benarott will bring you forward to speak to the council. And I know that's sometimes confusing as to whether you're in front of the council or not. I'll try to anticipate your coming to testify and indicate that you're live with us at that point in time. So again, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak. Manager Neil will be the timer for us, and he'll let you know when you're on the 3 minute mark, and then we need to have you wrap up your comments. So you don't have to call in if you've already made comments in some other form or fashion. That's going to be considered equally. But Director Benarott, let's now go to public testimony.
Good evening. Our first caller tonight is Shelley Loberg. Operator, will you please unmute Ms. Loberg's line? And Ms. Loberg, please begin by stating your full name and address for the record.
Good evening, Mayor Hovland and the council members. I'm Shelley Loberg, Vice President of the Edina Chamber of Commerce and Explore Edina at 3300 Edinburgh Way, Suite 650. And I know Lori Severson is virtually with us tonight too. I wanted to call and address tonight. The Chamber has submitted a formal letter to the City Council in support of this proposed project at 70th and France, and I believe it's in your packet tonight. We believe it will build and strengthen the integrity and the long-term desirability of our city's principal business district. And we think that the developer has done a really nice job of balancing the many factors that must be considered in a project like this. Regarding the building height, we think the project is on the right side of France, meaning the east side, and what we have seen is architecturally pleasing. It reflects a mixed-use approach that is consistent with building a more livable Southfield District community of the future. And we think they've done a really nice job addressing the design experience guidelines of the Southfield District Plan. It also is incorporating affordable apartments and conceals parking for a better aesthetic. And the design encourages walkability and connection to the other adjacent properties in the area. All of those things considered, we'd like to support the project tonight. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Loberg.
Members of the council, I do have at least one other caller on the line, but no one is indicating a desire to speak right now. As a reminder to those on the line, if you'd like to provide testimony, please press the *1 keys on your telephone keypad. That's the asterisk and then #1. That will signal your desire to speak, and we will introduce you at that point. My clock shows that it's 9:29. Because there is a slight delay in the broadcast, I would recommend we wait a minute or so before moving on. It actually just moved to 9:30. So I will watch my clock and either introduce a speaker or tell you when it's 9:31, whichever comes first.
Thank you.
Now 9:31, and I have no one else in the queue, so I would think you could move on at this point.
All right. Thank you, Director Benarott. I'm surprised, but we'll move on. Council members, is there a motion to close the public hearing at noon on December 9th and continue the action on the items embodied in this particular matter involving the U.S. Bank site to December 15, 2020 City Council meeting for action?
So
we got Member Brindle moving, Member Fisher seconding, I think. Any further discussion on that? Roll call with respect to the motion as stated. Clerk Allison.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. The motion carries and the matter will be closed at noon on December 9th, and then we will make a decision on these requests at our December 15, 2020 City Council meeting. Thank you, everybody, for participating.
So I did not make all my comments or ask all my questions before because I was concerned there would be people hanging on the line for a long time. So can I finish with a few things?
Sure, Member Brindle, why don't you do that? If we want to make sure that we got good clarification here going into the meeting on the 15th.
Mr. Mayor, just as a point of clarification, I understand that we're in a question asking phase as opposed to a commenting phase, that would take place at the next meeting after we've closed the public hearing and heard from everyone, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
If there are interrogatories or questions to be made, those can be made now, but we'll hold comments until the 15th. Member Brindle?
All right. So the thing I want to talk about is the 2 residential buildings on the site and what is this has been, if there's one thing about this that I'm really concerned about, it's 2 residential buildings in the same development within the same square footage, if you will. And I haven't been able to get my head around it or understand why there are 2 residential buildings and why can't it be just one, or why can't they be connected to one another so that they aren't completely separate? Because I'm hearing a different message tonight than we got last time, where it was expressed that the tall building was market rate and the shorter building to the south was going to be workforce affordable housing. That concerned me a great deal. And so I guess I'd like to know, and I know that that I'm hearing that you're not completely comfortable answering questions about affordable housing tonight, but I do want to get a notion of why there are two buildings.
All right, let's posit the question in that manner. Why are they proposing two buildings, one affordable, one market on the site?
Right.
Mayor, Councilmember Brindle, I can answer the first part of that question. The reason there are two buildings is the site at a basic level is divided into 4 quadrants, and that is to fulfill the desire for the small urban grid block pattern. Because the site is large enough at its size to need those internal streets, they're therefore separated into those 4 quadrants. So what we have is 4 developable parcels essentially once that street grid is implemented, and we feel that 2 of them should be multifamily residential. With respect to that's the reason there's 2 of them at a basic level, and then that's also the reason that they're not connected. To answer that part of your question, Councilmember Brindle, the urban grid block pattern and the desire for that. And the calling out from your city plans to have it that way is the reason that there's the 2 buildings and that they're separated by that 71st Street extension. With respect to the allocation of the other parts of the multifamily, I'll kick that question over to Mr. Webb.
All right, Mr. Webb, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brindle. Just to be clear, I know before we were saying that the Site C, the low rise, was going to be workforce. We've again taken a step back and kind of evaluated affordable housing holistically on the site itself. So we're excited about the opportunity to take advantage of the design guidelines and this grid system to evaluate multiple different housing options. It doesn't necessarily have to be market rate. It doesn't have to be workforce. It could also be senior. So as we're continuing to go through the approval process with the city, and as we go and finalize through site plan review, we are confident that we'll be able to narrow down on how we'll allow these different sites to unfold for housing.
I just want to be sure that it's not a really nice building and a not so nice building. And I know that's really blunt because I know that you wouldn't do that, but the perception once built, I'm kind of looking at how is the development going to be perceived and making sure that it all fits together and is cohesive. And so one doesn't feel like this is this and that is not. And so I'm really sensitive to it because we're working really hard to discover equity and be equitable, and I don't want to put something in place that creates a challenge to that.
I really appreciate that comment. I never provided the context that I actually have worked on multiple workforce and affordable housing projects before. I'm actually working on another one that does have 20% affordable at 50 in a different city. So I really appreciate the comment, and I will definitely take that into account as we finalize our plans for housing.
Great, thank you. That's what I needed.
Thank you. And Councilmember Brindle, one thing to add is that there's really great guideposts on the design elements within the guidelines and building materials. So from a look and aesthetic feel, absolutely, as a development team, we want it, but there's also guideposts in play within the design guidelines to make sure that they're both beautiful buildings.
Great, thank you. And Ted, thank you for your kind words earlier. I do appreciate it. After tonight, I have 2 HRA meetings and 1 council meeting left before I say sayonara. So I do appreciate your comments. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And don't forget, Member Brindle, we will be the final arbiter of design and materials.
Yes, understood.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Member Fisher.
I just want to, you just made that comment about being the final arbiter of design and materials, and I'm glad you asked the question earlier about what exactly are we approving here tonight, because if you read, the header on this topic, and if you look at the documents, it refers to preliminary design approval. not just PUD approval. And when I saw that, I think of, well, everything we look at in preliminary design, when we get to final, it's just like, have they veered away? If they haven't, you're kind of down that path. But this is an unusual project. It's 4 blocks, essentially. It's large. And so, I had a lot of questions here that were probably diving into that next level. The question, for example, that I asked about, what's the screening between the street and the parking? Well, that parking could change dramatically, in that building by the time we get to that phase. So I just want to make sure we're all clear that, because I can reframe my thinking when we get to our next meeting, that it's really about this. I would think the most important thing we would be approving is obviously the PUD, but are we comfortable with this layout? Once these streets are set, that's our master plan that we're set on, and the buildings within these blocks, I'm assuming then would still change a little. The uses could change a little. The market could require different things that we're all, I guess, Carrie, it would be helpful for me to make sure that I fully understand what I'm voting on a couple weeks from now.
Yep, certainly, Councilmember Fisher, Mayor Hovland. What's requested here is preliminary rezoning, preliminary development plan for the whole site, but also preliminary site plan for the bank. Their next step would be final rezoning for the whole site with the overall development plan and final site plan for the bank. So the plans that are a little more detailed are for the bank. For the next phase, and that would just go to the city council for your approval for final. But the other phases, those are more the overall development plan. So when those phases are ready to develop, they would go through the site plan review with Planning Commission and the City Council, public hearings for both. So it's really that this first phase is just for the bank, and you're granting preliminary rezoning for the whole site, potentially a final rezoning with the overall development plan, and final site plan just for the bank.
So let me ask the question about, I certainly have, even though people didn't with the virtual public hearing here, clearly we're hearing from people. We're getting emails and calls, and a lot of the concern is about height, in particular of the housing on Block C, or is it A? A. And so my question is, do we take that on and approve a height in 2 weeks, or is that kind of go with the building approval when you get to there? I mean, what's the right sequence to discuss that so the developer knows? I'm trying to think both sides of this. I mean, on the one hand, you want to know what your parameters are, and the other, we all have to be flexible down the road as markets shift, right? So what do we want to accomplish in that regard?
Yep, the city would be approving a PUD ordinance for the site that would establish that 24-story height limitation. So we haven't detailed, we haven't approved a building specifically. We've got the overall development plan and the preliminary development plan, but the details would still come in a site plan. However, the new zoning for the site would allow the 24 stories. So you are approving at final development or at final rezoning, you would be establishing that height.
All right, so we're going to create the envelope into which this can be, and that might even include a minimum height or a maximum, but whatever that is, and then the details can happen later. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
It's kind of like the Avenue on France project.
I agree.
600 through 68. We approved that overall master plan. We approved final site plan for just those retail restaurants, but the rest of it, they would have had to come back and go through the process. So it's very similar to that.
And we put a cap on the amount of height over there with respect to that singular building.
Correct.
Avenue in France, which is what we'd be doing here.
Right.
If it was approved. Yeah. Now the question,
It might be helpful, Mr. Mayor, just for Mr. Teague as for our packet for the next meeting to have a more elaborate explanation of how this process all lays out so that everybody's on the same page.
Sure, you can do that.
The one item you mentioned that gives me a little bit of pause is with respect to the bank. So on December 15th, we're going to be potentially approving the bank design on a preliminary basis based on what we've seen so far. So we haven't, what if council members on the 15th have further questions about design and materials that gives them concern, or the amount of transparency? I know that there was some issue raised before we heard the testimony tonight from Mr. Hischlin that there was inadequate amount of transparency at the street level. So, when you think about wanting them to have the best possible materials because it's a flagship for them, and you want to make sure they're doing what you intended, or something that, in my mind at least, would be equivalent to what Bank of America did across the street, and we required them to do across the street. When do we raise those issues? Tonight or next on the 15th?
It could be tonight or the 15th. So yeah, whatever conditions you place on them for the 15th, let's say you require that they meet the 75% requirement, or you require the 50-foot setback. When they come back for final approval, those plans have to meet those conditions that you establish on the 15th.
Okay. So when will we see actually what materials they are going to be using? When they had the renderings of the bank this evening, it looked like stone, but I wasn't sure if it was natural stone or manufactured stone on the side of the building. And those were some of the questions that I had that I decided to defer on until the 15th. So what's the best way to handle that?
Yeah, they did indicate the materials in the plans. Perhaps Mr. Reardon could address that.
Well, Mr. Hischland is the one who needs to address it, I think.
Oh, yeah, yep. Is he still with us?
Yeah, I am.
Mr. Hischland's still here.
Yes, and again, we have put together elevations that were included in a supplement prior to the planning and zoning, and I believe that was probably 4 weeks ago. And with that, it did have material calculations. It's an actual limestone product, metal panels, curtain wall, storefront in some areas, and where we get over a certain ceiling height, we're considering going to the curtain wall. But we do have exhibits that have been developed. I don't know if I wanted to submit them right now, show them for the first time, but I do know that we have had both for sketch plan and then a supplemental update with percentages of materials defined.
All right. Well, let's deal with that then on the 15th, because it sounds like what you want to do is have take those exhibits and go over them with staff. Go over them with staff. Is that right?
Yes.
And your other members of your team. All right. That seems reasonable. So we'll deal with this issue on the 15th. Okay. Any other comments from council members?
I have a few more questions if I could.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Fisher, Member Fisher.
And again, it's probably delving a little bit into the details of the building sites, but this one's a really important one. So it's the corner on France and 70th. It's your big corner, and you really made some great improvements on making a major entrance there. But because I didn't have the floor plans, I'm kind of trying to read between the lines and everything. I'm assuming in that corner, the circulation from the parking is coming down in a lobby in that area, and it joins whatever's happening perhaps in that space. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is it's one thing to have a major entrance for whatever use you have in that building, but you're going to want people moving in and out of that. Otherwise, it doesn't have the same impact. So if someone can just share what's the thinking, like where are people coming up and down in the parking, and how does it relate to that entrance?
Councilmember Fisher, certainly I can address that. The entrance for the level 1 commercial space there's two entrances, and one of them, is, you're correct, is at the corner of 70th and France, and the other is at the corner of 70th and Ewing. At this time, we are kind of thinking about the corner at 70th and Ewing at that northeast corner as the primary entrance for the commercial space itself, and that would also include the vertical circulation from the associated parking below and above at that location with respect to the commercial. With respect to vertical circulation to the office space itself, that's happening at the southeast corner, at the corner of Ewing and 71st, where the office lobby is located, down there at the southeast corner of the building. So, two primary entrances at the corner of 70th and France, as well as the corner of Ewing and 70th.
Okay. I mean, just again, I probably won't be here when you get to actual discussion about that building someday. But, assuming we get to that point and that's an actual discussion, I just would, the opportunity you have with parking above, again, no matter what the uses are on that first floor, it's going to be very transparent space because that's the requirement along France Avenue. And this is a real opportunity to make sure there's actual activity there. And what you have here that a lot of sites don't, because we've been pushing this transparency thing for a long time in different locations, and it kind of falls flat because no one uses those doors, right? They're coming from the parking. The unique thing you have is parking above. So you can dictate, and you're going to need exit points. So you have this opportunity that you're probably too early to get to now, but you can be bringing circulation down near that entrance and really bringing life to that point. So just throwing that out there. Had another, let's see, the stormwater, Councilmember Anderson hit that pretty well. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Fisher. Council members, any other questions before we move on to the next matter? Okay. All right, everybody, thanks for being with us this evening.
Did we ever vote on the continuance?
Oh, no, that's the next matter.
No, but on this one, I thought you were going to.
Oh, yeah. Did we vote?
We got a first and a second, but then
we got a first and a
side discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Member Staunton. Thank you.
Voted, actually.
Did we vote, Sharon?
I thought we did.
Yes.
Thanks. Sorry, it was so long ago.
Mr. Mayor.
I'm with you, Member Staunton.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Member Fisher.
I'm sorry, I have to ask one more question, if that's all right.
All right.
I was just thinking about the public hearing, and what I expected to hear is questions about the building heights. And so I just have to ask, in this meeting, not wait till the next one, why did you pick the heights you picked? Because I on two buildings. One, the 24-story, could have been less, could have been more, but you picked 24. I'm just curious why. And then almost the one that's more puzzling to me is the 9-story. That's not a normal height of a building that I see very often, and I'm just curious, why 9?
Great questions, Councilmember Fisher. So first, with respect to the 9-story building, at this point we are, it's a little bit about unit count and availability of what we can do on that site. Again, we don't know the demographic or even the type of housing that would be at this point, but we think there is a sweet spot with a certain construction type of metal stud at that 9 stories. And so that was the arrival at that height. For both of those reasons, construction type and number of units and density. And then with all that Ted and Brent supplement on the 24-story question, you know, we look when we look at these developments and we have parameters for size and density, unit counts. We look at options where, you know, you can consider a 10-story building or 11-story building that's much more bulky and occupies a greater footprint. That, of course, was studied as many other scenarios were, but we arrived at 24 stories due to the unit count we wanted, as well as an efficient floor plate to you know, build that tower at a cost conscious number. So the size of the floor plate and number of stories were dictated both by desired number of units as well as the cost factors in the building envelope.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from council members? Okay. All right. Thank you, Clerk Allison, for that information that we had voted. Appreciate that. We're going to move on now to item 8B, which is.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Carlson, Mr. Webb.
Thanks, everybody.
Mr. Hischlin.
Mr. Reardon.
Reardon. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
See you in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
All right. Now the next matter is potential continuance on the proposed project at 6600, 6800 France Avenue, and Director Teague has this matter.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This evening, we're asking that you continue the public hearing for this very large project, similar to the last one, to the January 5th, 2021 City Council meeting. Trying to do two large public hearings like this at the same meeting, we thought wasn't a very good idea. We did it at the Planning Commission and it went very late. We had a few frustrated residents who were waiting in the queue, but didn't hang on until the end of the public hearing. So we've spoken to the applicant. They weren't real happy about it, but they understood the situation that we're in. So we would ask that you continue to January 5th. In terms of the 60-day rule, we're okay. We're still in the first 60 days. The second 60-day, you basically have until your second meeting in February to render a decision on this one.
All right. Thank you, Director Teague. Questions for Director Teague? All right. Is there a motion to continue the public hearing to January 5th, 2021 on the 6600 to 6800 France Avenue project?
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Member Staunton, second by Member Fisher, I believe. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. The matter involving 6600 6800 France Avenue is continued to the January 5th, 2021 meeting of the council for a public hearing. All right. The third matter we have in the public hearing portion of the agenda tonight involves the potential adoption of Resolution 2020-120, which would set the 2021 tax levy and adopt the 2021 operating budget. And Manager Neal is going to introduce the matter, and then we have Don Urim, our financial director, and Andrea Rich, our financial analyst, with us to help us through these two matters. Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. Tonight we are asking the City Council to give final approval to, or conduct a public hearing and possibly give final approval to the proposed city budget for 2021, which includes the proposed tax levy final tax levy for 2021, and as well as our updated our capital improvement plan. We've had a long process, and we'll take a look at the timeline for how we got here tonight. What we want to cover in our presentation tonight is budget process timeline, the capital improvement plan itself, the summary of the 2021 budget and levies, some tax comparisons, and then ask and stand for questions if we have questions from council or from the public. when you think about our overall consolidated budget, we spend in total about $130 million this year in 2020. And when you think about how that money is distributed, about half of it, a little more than half of it actually is spent in our governmental funds. So $76 million total. 49 million of that is spent in our general fund. The general fund is typically the fund that attracts the most attention, both from employees, from council, and from the community, because that's mostly where we see our property taxes show up in our spending, both in the general fund, the debt service fund, the construction fund, and then the HRA. In the middle section, we have our enterprise funds. Edina has, compared to other cities its size and complexity, a large enterprise fund structure. So our utility fund, liquor fund, and our park enterprises are all the main components of above almost a $50 million enterprise budget. And finally, on the other side of the spectrum are the internal service funds. These are relatively new in the way that we're showing them to the council, but this is where we account for kind of those corporate overhead functions: risk management, equipment operations, IT, and facilities. We conduct ourselves in a biennial budget process. So in even-numbered years, we are doing budget planning for the operating budget planning for the upcoming 2-year budget process. And that's what we're going to do next year. So in 2021, we will be forming and asking the council to approve a budget, an operating budget for 2022 and 2023. The budget year that we're in right now, that we are looking at for 2021, was a budget that we came to an agreement with the council in December of 2019. So we're in the second year of a 2-year budget. When we are in a year like 2020, an even-numbered year, we spend that most of our time kind of doing the more precise updates to our budget proposal, but also looking at our capital spending for the 5-year time period ahead. And that's what we did this year. And I think Lisa's going to take the next couple of slides from here.
I will, thank you. And
thank you.
So in Edina, as the city manager Neil just said, our budget work plan and our budget are developed at the same time. And that process starts actually by looking at our strategic policy documents. So Vision Edina is our overarching strategy guide for the city, and that was approved in 2015. We also have then that formed the basis for our 10-year comprehensive plan, which was approved in August of this year. And then tonight, hopefully, or later at the next council meeting, the capital improvement plan, which was a 5-year plan, is now a 6-year plan, will be approved. And those 3 documents together really form the basis of our strategy. And then on an operational perspective, we're looking at developing the budget work plan at the same time as the operating budget. I would say that is a best practice model to use. It's not necessarily a very common model in municipal government to use because it does take a lot of work. But the benefit of that is that we're making sure that we are planning for our projects and our work at the same time as the budget versus starting with the budget and figuring out what we can accomplish within a certain dollar amount instead of starting with what the needs are. From that, once the budget and the budget work plan are approved, that funnels down to department work plans and individual work plans for the city. On the next slide, this really describes what the basis of our budget and work plan encompasses. And a couple of budget work plans processes ago, I think we're on our second one now, the council had determined on 4 goals that we would continue to carry through year for year. And so strong foundation is really where we're talking about maintaining our physical assets and infrastructure. With reliable service, we're talking about how do we best balance and meet the needs of the community. With livable cities, we're planning for connected and sustained development. And then with Better Together, we're really trying to make sure that our practices are fostering an inclusive and engaged community. And those 4 goals carry over from budget to budget. What does change, though, is what our objectives are for each particular budget to accomplish those goals, and then also what specific projects we accomplished during that time.
So, Mayor and Council, I will take the remaining slides, which talk about the details of the capital improvements plan as well as the 2021 budget. So this next slide talks a little bit about the timeline that we followed this year in preparing the capital improvements plan. And you can see that this is typically it's almost a year-long process for us, starting with a kickoff in early March and working through with the departments, the development of the CIP, going through the prioritization process, presenting to the City Council at work sessions, with the ultimate goal of presenting tonight a capital improvements plan that we are asking the City Council to approve. The process that we follow is really all-encompassing in that it takes into consideration all of the departments in terms of preparing capital improvement items for submittal. Those are presented to the department heads and the leadership team in terms of prioritizing the projects, and ultimately with the city manager recommending a capital improvements plan to the City Council. This next slide shows the debt service levy that we currently have in place that's funded by tax dollars. And the purpose of showing this is that this is part of an overall strategy for funding the capital improvements plan. And I can show you that you can see in years 21 and 22 how debt service drops off. And that debt service, which is shown in this table, part of the strategy is to include that as a capital improvement plan. For example, the budget for 2020 had $952,000 for debt service for City Hall. In 2021, that debt service is no longer needed, and the increase in the capital improvements plan makes up that difference. So what we're doing is we're just taking that difference and putting into the capital improvements plan levy. Funding for the capital improvements plan is somewhat limited in terms of what we can use for prioritizing projects. If you can just look at the first column, there's a lot of funding sources that are already allocated, including MSA money or special assessment or tax increment. The center column talks about what's available to prioritize, typically utility transfers or the CIP levy or liquor transfer. And in some cases, there are potentially other sources available for us, including park dedication fees and general fund surplus. A committee was put together this year that included representatives from all departments. And as they looked at recommending projects to leadership, they really identified them as 3 different categories: high, medium, and low, with high being critical infrastructure needs and low is that the project can wait. They also looked at some other items, including if it was a life safety issue or a code requirement or an immediate need. The CIP committee made recommendations for about $1.5 million for the next 3 years. They felt it was necessary to retain the option to allocate $500,000 during the year for critical projects, emergency repairs, that sort of thing. And the committee will meet on occasion throughout the year to evaluate those needs and when to spend the additional $500,000. So this CIP compared to the previous CIP, approximately the same number of projects were submitted by the department heads, about 265. The difference between the two really is the dollar amount. Our previous CIP was at $189 million, and this one is up to 271 million. Now, part of that difference is the addition of a sixth year, which includes 40 million. And the largest increases in buildings and infrastructure. So you can just see that from a pie chart perspective, the majority of our spending is in, or projects is in infrastructure, with the second largest amount in buildings. This is a pie chart that shows the CIP by funding source. And as I mentioned earlier in the work session, the difference between this slide and one that was previously shown is that we've broken down the construction fund levy to be a little more transparent. You can see at the top of the pie chart that the construction fund CIP levy is about 3.7% of the funding sources. The equipment levy is at 5%, and the construction fund others at about 14%. And that's special assessments. Our largest funding source is the utility funds. Unfortunately, we have about 40% of the projects that the funding has yet to be determined. For the next couple of years, the majority of the money is going to be spent in buildings and parks. You can see that there's a reserve of about 25% for asset preservation. And as those projects come up and are approved, they will be placed into the individual category that they belong. The challenges with the CIP, like many cities face, is that we have more projects than we have funding sources. About 72 million of the funding to be determined projects is considered buildings and 29 million as park and rec. And we have about $2 million to allocate. Part of the challenge with the park and rec infrastructure improvements and replacements is a funding source. And then we have a gap in the equipment needs. So moving on to the budget. So what this shows is really a summary of what was approved back in 2019. So for 2021, we are recommending that the budget and tax levy be adopted as approved in 2019, which shows a 5.95% levy increase over 2020. Broken down into the various categories of general fund, debt service, construction, and the HRA. The 2021 tax levy, as I had indicated, is up 5.95% over last year. You know, the city is a service industry, and our largest expenditure is for people. As you can see, about 3% of the levy increases for wages and benefits, really necessary to provide the services that the Edina residents insist upon. Another portion of the increase, a larger portion increases with the internal service funds. Those costs continue to increase, so that's part of the increase. Some minor increases in the other categories. So the levy impacts, which is something we're always concerned about. In 2020, the median value home pays about $131,000, $131 per month in property taxes. And that median value home is about $548,000.
Thanks for that correction.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm starting to think in thousands at this point. So our estimated market value has increased by about 3.7% for taxes payable in 2021, and the median value home is now $551,000. With the tax increase, or the property tax increase as proposed, that median value home will see a $57 increase per year, or about $4.75 in city taxes. So overall, a $136 payment for city taxes in 2021. Later on this evening, when we adjourn the city council meeting, we will also have a HRA meeting to approve the HRA budget. The HRA per state statute, can levy up to a portion of the estimated market value. You know, based on the city's tax base of $13.3 billion, the city or the HRA could levy up to $2.3 million. We're actually only going to levy $230,400. The HRA levy is separate from the city, and the uses, we can only use the money for purposes in the HRA Act. That levy would be about a $9 a year impact on the median value home. The property tax distribution, we show this because it's interesting to see the difference between the residential property tax and the commercial property tax. So with residential properties, the city of Edina gets about 21% of the property tax dollar. With commercial property, the city of Edina gets about 11% of that property tax dollar. With commercial properties, the majority of the tax dollars go to the fiscal disparities in the state of Minnesota. So it's an interesting comparison. The tax base for the city of Edina is primarily residential.
Hey, Don, can we go back to that slide? I want to just make a quick comment.
Yeah.
I mean, one quick comment I want to make on this particular slide is around the pie graph on the left-hand side. And I think it's important to note that what we're showing you here is what is the most common composition of taxing bodies for our residential property. So that is a single-family home or a residential home that's in the Edina School District, Hennepin County, the city, and the watershed district. It might be 9 Mile or it might be Minnehaha, but there's also combinations of Hopkins School, city, Hennepin, 9 Mile, watershed district. That might be Hopkins School District, city, in a different watershed district. It might be 9 Mile, Richfield Schools, city, Hennepin, et cetera. There's really, I think, about a dozen different combinations of city, school district, watershed district that are all part of our city. This one happens to be the most common one.
Thank you, Manager Neal.
The next slide is just, the next few slides are actually just a historical perspective on where we've been and where we're at today. The first one is the estimated market value. You can see from 2011 to 2021, it has gone from 9.4 billion to 13.3 billion. The low point was in 2013 at $8.9 billion. And that really was reflected the market values after the housing crises in 2008, 2009. The city of Edina fared very well compared to some of the other cities in terms of market values during this time period. Property tax history, the bottom line is the city tax and the top line is the total tax for the median value home. The lines are fairly flat. You can just see from a city tax perspective in 2011, the median value home paid just over $1,000 and proposed for 2021 is about $1,600. So gradual increases over time. The property tax history on the $400,000 home, and we use this as a comparison to our peers whose market values are more comparable to this level than to what our market values are. Again, the lines are fairly flat. You can see the $400,000 home, just over $1,000 payment in 2011, and about an $1,154 payment in 2021. So again, a very gradual increase over time. And then the median value home, which is adjusted for the CPI. Back in 2010, that home would pay $859 in city taxes, and today would pay, or in 2020 would pay $1,115. So the next step. So tonight is a public hearing scheduled for the city council to take comments from residents if they so choose. We are asking that the city council adopt the resolution certifying the tax levy tonight. And if you decide to move it to the next agenda, to the next city council meeting, that's the final date that we can take action is on December 15th. So with that, we are available for questions or discussion.
Questions or comments for Director Urim or Manager Neal with respect to the budget proposal? Member Anderson?
Thank you. Just a question. We kept out in the budget stabilization fund, there was an amount that was carried forward. I don't think that's referenced in the budget, but the amount that was carried forward is slipping my memory at the moment. So we're holding that out at this time, correct?
That is correct.
And what's that amount?
So it'll be approximately $4 million.
Yeah. And so that 4 million is adequate to cover really any shortfalls in other funding that we might anticipate. That's a fair statement?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good. That's useful. Last thing, and I'll mention this again. I've mentioned it before. CIP is a challenge for us, as you mentioned in the staff report. We've got 105 million that's unfunded. And we're not going to resolve that tonight. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. It's simply that there's some really big ticket items in here, and I don't know how we ever get our arms around it without being extremely creative and deciding for either alternative uses for some of this or just really coming to terms with the fact that we have to charge ahead with some of these items. I heard Manager Neal earlier touch base on fire stations. Our own consultants have indicated that we need them. We're looking at hundreds of units of equipment. I mean, I want to make sure that we can provide emergency services to those if necessary. So I just want to mention that again. And going forward, I hope that we can find some resolution or further discussion.
Other questions or comments regarding the proposed budget for 2021? Manager Neal, do you want to, we've been working on this since June, and we're certainly not unmindful of the situation we're in 2020, as Member Anderson mentioned, with keeping a budget reserve of about $4 million to meet any contingent difficulties that we have. But I think it might be appropriate for us to talk about some of the conversations we've had as a council about taxpayer relief. We've approved a budget in 2019, and we're sticking to it. And there's a reason for that, I think, possibly anticipating that there may be more challenging times ahead. Maybe you want to speak to that a bit.
Certainly. Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, when we think about the budget planning that we did in 2019, that really is influencing what we're doing today, it's still relevant to us in the same sense that we work with the council to establish goals for what you want city government to do in the community, and then we build a budget around those goals. Some of those goals are based on service levels that residents have told you that they want to see in the community, both verbally, in writing, but also through our quality of life survey. And that's where we attract, that's where we gain some intelligence in terms of what residents are wanting from us and how do we structure our service levels to provide that. So that's a big driving force in where we are today. When we think about going forward in 2021, we will embark on an operating budget process looking at years 2022 and 2023. One of the things to keep in mind is that the property that the changes in the market value impacts that we see going on in our market right now in 2020, those will impact values that we will see in 2021 and 2022, and taxes that we will collect in 2022 and 2023. So we have some I think, justifiable concern about what property values, particularly commercial property values, will be like in 2022 and 2023. And we have this lag that's part of the Minnesota property tax system for city governments that protects us in some very real ways from quick whipsaws in terms of revenues and shocks to our revenue system. So we have taken some prudent action earlier this year to establish a budget stabilization fund that we may need to use actually in 2022 or 2023, depending on how quickly the economy comes back from the pandemic. So we are thinking about that, and we're going to be dealing with that a lot in the next 6 months as we begin that budget preparation process next year.
All right, good. Thank you. This is, as we mentioned before the presentation, a public hearing matter. And we will now open this matter up for public testimony so we can hear from residents who would like to provide testimony in this matter involving the budget and the CIP. So if you want to testify, call in now at 800-374-0221. Recall the conference ID is 154-8149. 154-8149. An operator will ask for your name and address. They'll put you in the queue. Director Benarott will let you know when you can speak to the council, and then we'll hear your testimony. Director Benarott, do we have anybody in the queue?
Do not have anyone in the queue, though I do have a caller on the line. As a reminder, if you'd like to provide testimony, please press *1 on your telephone keypad. Because there is a slight delay in the broadcast, I would recommend we wait for a minute or so before moving on. My clock shows that it's 10:25, so I will come back to you either when we have a caller in the queue or 10:26, whichever is first.
Thank you.
Now 10:26, and I don't have anyone in the queue, so I think it's safe for you to move forward.
All right. Is there a motion to close the public hearing in this matter?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We had a motion by Member Brindle, second by Member Anderson to close the public hearing in this matter. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Brindle?
Aye.
Member Fisher?
Aye.
Member Staunton?
Aye.
Mayor Hovland?
Aye. Motion passes. We will close the public hearing with regard to the proposed tax levy. Is there now a motion from any council member moving to approve Resolution 2020-120, which sets the 2021 tax levy and adopts the 2021 operating budget, and also would also part of that motion be approving the 2021 through 2026 capital improvement plan?
So moved.
Second.
Member Fisher moves, Member Brindle seconds. Any further discussion regarding the motion as stated? Roll call, please. Ms. Allison?
Member Anderson?
Aye.
Member Brindle?
Aye.
Member Fisher?
Aye.
Member Staunton?
Aye.
Mayor Hovland?
Aye. Resolution 2020-120, which sets the 2021 tax levy and adopts the 2021 operating budget, is approved, as is the 2021 through 2026 capital improvement plan. Thank you for all your hard work for the last 6 months, really, on this particular matter. Staff in particular, you do a wonderful job of getting us prepared to make a decision that makes sense for our community. Thank you. Manager Neal?
And Your Honor, on behalf of the staff, I just want to thank the council for taking this action tonight. I know it's contrary to what we've been trying to do with our public hearings, but this is a really busy month. for our finance and for our finance team and other kind of employees that are working in City Hall. And so having the extra couple of weeks to put this together and to get it all buttoned up before the end of the year is really important to us. And so thank you for doing that.
All right. Thank you. Last public hearing matter involves proposed ordinance 2020-14, which sets the fees for 2021. And Kyle Sawyer, our Assistant Finance Director, has this matter.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Every year, the Finance Department compiles the fees proposed to change for the following year from the various departments, specifically the city code fees. We bring those to the City Council about this time every year in December for public hearing, review, and questions. So tonight you have in front of you ordinance number 2020-14. It shows the city code fees that are proposed to change for 2021. I'll give you a quick overview on some of the kind of the chapters that have more changes than others. The chapter 10, building permit fees are proposed to increase between 1 and 1.8%. That's to better align with the cost of service. Chapter 28, the utility fees are proposed to increase 5% for water and sanitary sewer and 8% for storm sewer. This is to fund the ongoing infrastructure capital needs and the cost of the service. This is in line with the updated rate study that was presented to the council at the October 20th work session. That is a typo in the cover sheet for this item tonight. I have November 20th listed. That was the October 20th work session. And that is in line with the presentation that was given from Ellers and staff that night. As you're probably familiar with in years past, the Morningside rates are not part of this proposal tonight, or excuse me, this ordinance tonight. Those will be brought back to the council in January once we receive those rates from Minneapolis. So council does have the option to take action on this item tonight by waiving second reading. I wouldn't stand because I'm not in the council chambers, but I will sit for any questions yeah, go forward with the public hearing.
All right, thank you, Director Sawyer. Any questions for Assistant Director Sawyer with regard to the proposed fee schedules? Member Brindle?
Thank you. So we did have an inquiry earlier tonight during community comment, and I don't know if he's on here or not for the public hearing, but the question was the permit fees and why they were going up 1 and 1.5%, and some of the other fees were going up 5%. Do the permit fees cover our costs? And is it right there? Is 1 and 1.5%? Is that sufficient?
So I did speak to our building official, Dave Fisher, about this item. Those fee increases did come from him, and they were to cover the costs of service. He believed that those increases would cover the cost of service. Obviously, inflation can be variable, so it is hard to say with 100% accuracy that it's covering them. I believe they did not increase those fees last year. So this is a small incremental increase, Councilmember Brindle. I'm not sure what the reference to the 5% increases are. Within that building department chapter, I believe they were all within the 1 to 1.8.
Okay.
Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is a politically sensitive number, and we know that at the city level, especially in a community like Edina that is seeing a lot of growth in building permit fees. So we pay very close attention to what it costs us to provide these services and how we price our building permit costs back to the development and building community. So we feel pretty good about the precision of the numbers that we're using to charge on the building permit side.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I think Mr. Brown was thinking that we needed to make sure that we were thinking comprehensively about all the costs involved in creating that cost of service number to get it to balance against the the fees that we're charging, because we know the fees need to align with that cost of service. So I think that was his inquiry. Make sure that we're looking at all the cost factors that might drive changes in permit fees. Any other questions from council members? Otherwise, this is a public hearing matter. We'll get some public testimony in this particular matter, or at least ask for it. So we'll now hear from residents. I'll open this up for public testimony. Time for residents to call in. 800-374-0221, conference ID 1548149, 1548149. You'll have an operator that will ask you for your name and street address, put you in the queue to speak, and Director Benarott will bring you in to speak to the council. The matter is now open for public testimony. Director Benarott, do we have anybody in the queue?
We do not have anyone in the queue. We do have a couple of people on the line, though. As a reminder, if you'd like to provide testimony, please press *1 on your telephone keypad to get into the queue. Because we do have people watching from home and there is a slight delay with the broadcast, before moving on, I'd like to wait a minute or so. So my clock shows it just turned 10:35, so I will come back to you at 10:36 or when I have a caller, whichever is first.
Thank you.
Is 10:36 and I have no one on the line anymore, so I think it's safe for you to move forward.
All right, very good. This is another matter I think we could deal with this evening. So, and I think staff would like that. And so first, preliminarily, we need to close the public hearing in this matter. Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Member Brindle moves.
Second.
Member Anderson seconds. Any further discussion with regard to closing the public hearing on proposed ordinance modification 2020-114? Okay.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. Motion passes. The motion passes. The hearing is closed. Now, do we have a motion from any of the council members that would approve ordinance number 2020-14, which would amend City Code Chapter 2, Section 2-724, Schedule A, which sets the fees for 2021, and also waive second reading of that ordinance amendment?
So moved.
Member Fisher moves.
Second.
Member Staunton seconds. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, with respect to the motion as stated.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. The motion is approved. Ordinance 2020-14 is amended to adjust the Schedule A setting fees for 2021, and the second reading of it is waived, so we can get those in effect immediately. So thank you, everybody, for that. Correspondence and petitions. Has anything come in? Clerk Allison or Jennifer Garski or Manager Neal that we need to know about since the meeting started?
Nope, there has not.
Okay. Aviation noise update. Member Brindle?
Thank you. I've heard from a resident in the Cornelia neighborhood, and maybe Member Fisher can can help me on this one. But excessive airplane noise and I don't know if it's departures or arrivals. I have not looked at the flight tracker to see in that period of time. But an airplane, then another airplane, then another airplane. And I know that I was talking with a resident last night, and we were talking about rush hours. And there are a couple of rush hours that the airport experiences every day. And so it's possible based on the wind, but also in this lower traffic time, they're just using the parallel runways of 12 and 30. And so those runways can send airplanes our direction repeatedly because they are just using the parallel runways. So I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. I know that I've been hearing loud propeller airplanes, which I'm guessing are the C-130s. And in the middle of the day, we'll have 3 of them in the middle of the afternoon. And they don't follow any sort of rush hour pattern. They just go when the Air Force needs to go. And so there is some noise. And so I'll touch base and make sure, as usual, when a resident calls or sends an email with concerns, I have an email that I send back with a variety of tools and resources that they can refer to make sure they're aware that the Mac Noise website provides a lot of information in a lot of ways for people to learn about what's in the sky above them. But I will follow up on that. And then the next noise oversight meeting committee meeting is January 20th at 1:30 in the afternoon. And as it has been, I'm sure it'll be a virtual meeting. So that's what I have.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Manager Neal, anything supplemental to that?
Nothing supplemental to that, sir.
Okay, thank you. Council comments. Member Staunton, anything?
Nothing from me, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Member Anderson?
Just a recognition of the fact that I don't think we had anybody on the line in our public hearing tonight. And I noticed that on the same matter that there was only one caller into the Planning Commission public hearing. And we are getting response. Better Together is getting response. We're certainly getting some emails. There's other levels of communication. But I don't know if people are dropping out because of the wait or whether the queue isn't working very well for them. But I'm hoping that we can make some adjustments or find an adjustment of some kind so that we get more participation. And it could be just reordering the process in some way. I tend to ask a lot of questions. Others do as well. And so I hope that we're not boxing people out in any way. Maybe I'm misconstruing, but to have no one call in on a matter of, I think, of interest is it's odd.
Yeah, thank you, Member Anderson.
Mr. Mayor, if I could piggyback on that, I agree. And I spent 3 hours of my life watching the Planning Commission meeting as well. And it was well past 2 hours before the public hearing was open. So I think we should just think about whether, especially in this format, maybe we want to do the public hearing even up front. I don't know. It's hard. There's a lot of trade-offs, but I agree with Member Anderson. There's something isn't adding up here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think those are both good observations. I think we're using this virtual platform, there are pluses and minuses to it, and I think we need to figure out how to optimize the opportunities for people to be able to participate until we get back to what we used to be doing, and that is meeting in person, and that may be a year. So we better try to make the best of it and figure out how we can make this work for everybody in our community. Member Anderson, anything else? Was that your main issue?
Yeah, that was, other than just really appreciate Member Brendel's update. She knows aircraft definitions and she's got it. So thank you. And we'll miss that. Although I know that you have offered to continue, and we'll have to find a way to pipe you in some way for this report if in fact you do so.
All right. Member Fisher.
Mr. Fisher, Councilmember Fisher is unable to join. He's having some technical difficulties.
Oh, okay.
So he said, go ahead without him.
All right, Member Brindle.
I don't have anything tonight. So short and sweet.
Okay, good. Just a couple of quick things for me. Mayors across the state are working on a broadband strategy. The governor has a task force in place looking at broadband, and I think we need to start thinking seriously about this digital infrastructure of ours. If we're going to be continuing to do work like we're doing, we need to start thinking about this as like water in a way, like a life source. And so we better be able to get as much through the pipe as we can, as fast as we can. So we're working on that. And then mayors are also working on the last mile, I'll call it, this vaccine distribution. Trying to get a meeting with the governor to find out exactly what is the plan of distribution. How are we going to do the vaccinations themselves? We haven't heard a thing yet, and I think mayors and city councils across the state could be really great allies in touting the benefits of getting the vaccine and making sure that we have the right facilities lined up, the right ability to keep the temperature controlled the way it needs to be controlled for some Pfizer vaccines or all the Pfizer vaccines. So that's one thing we're working on as well. And then we're back doing Mayor's Minute. We did the first one last Wednesday, the 25th. And we'll be doing it weekly for an indeterminate amount of time here, I guess is all I can say. We agreed that we should be doing it weekly, and that's what we'll be doing. And then we did a cute little video for the Christmas tree lighting at 50th and France, and that's on the city's YouTube station. You might want to watch that as well. It's kind of fun to see. Anyway, that's it for me. Manager Neal.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have three quick things. One is just a reminder that we do have a special council meeting next Monday, December 7th at 6 p.m. This is to conduct the hearings for our special assessment street project for next year. Second is it's your favorite time of year almost. It's city manager performance review time, and I did talk to Craig Waldron and he's got time in his calendar to assist the council with that. If that seems okay to you, I can line him up to do that. Finally, the January 5th work session that typically we do not, we take a pass on that first work session of the year, but we need it this year to brief council and to discuss with you how you want to do board and commission selection this year. Every year we talk about doing it a little differently. We'd like to, and we're going to have 2 new council members to bring into that process. So it would be a good time for us to sit down and kind of go through it and see if there is an alternative to how we do it now that everybody would like to take a look at. We are into the recruitment process already, so that part of it we're doing largely the same as we have in previous years. This is just talking about the selection process itself. And that's all I've got for you.
Okay, good. Just a reminder that we've got a short HRA meeting following this meeting, and staff needs a little bit of time to finalize this broadcast and then convert over to the new one. I don't know if we need to go anywhere, but Scott Denfeld, what Anything else from council members? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by member Brindle, second by member Staunton to adjourn the city council meeting of December 1st, 2020. Member Fisher is back just in time to vote. Adjournment.
Councilmember Anderson.
Aye.
Councilmember Brindle.
Aye.
Councilmember Fisher.
Aye.
Councilmember Staunton.
Aye.
Mayor Hovland.
Aye. We stand adjourned. Mike, stay on the line here, and Scott's just going to switch some things over. So we'll just stay here and
Okay.
have a little informal conversation, I guess.